Today, a woman killed by a falling tree as cyclone-strength winds and heavy rain batter the southeast of the country.
We are expecting the winds to pick up again from around about 11 a.m. this morning, and then another front coming through into the afternoon.
Meanwhile, an emergency flood warning remains in place for Tasmania's River Derwent, and affected residents are warned to evacuate now. Also ahead, 500,000 Israelis take to the streets demanding their government do a deal with Hamas to have hostages released. Ukraine comes under heavy attack in a ramped-up Russian missile retaliation to Kyiv's incursion into its territory. And more success for Australia at the Paralympics, with medals in the swimming and rowing. Hello, I'm Gemma Vaness. This is ABC News Mornings, coming to you from the land of the Gadigal people. A woman has been killed when a tree fell on a cabin in Moama on the Victoria-New South Wales border, as wild and damaging winds wreak havoc across much of southeastern Australia. Victorians are being told to stay home and avoid unnecessary travel as storms sweep across the state. The winds are so strong that they've been likened to a Category 2 cyclone. Tasmania has also been bearing the brunt of this weather with the evacuation orders along the Derwent and Styx rivers. This follows a chaotic weekend with hundreds of calls to the SES and tens of thousands without power. We're going to speak with our reporter Selena Ross in Hobart shortly. First to Mietta Adams in Melbourne though. Now Mietta, what is the situation there at the moment?
Good morning, Gemma. Well, it is pretty dire here. We're outside this cafe in Armidale on High Street, which is in the city's inner southeast, and it's completely decimated. You can see the bricks all over. The facade is fallen over. It's all just completely destroyed. It's one of the very many few places we've seen this morning where trees have fallen on fences, footpaths, bricks out of their sockets. It's just crazy, this wind. It all started around 2 o'clock this morning, and it's really been coming through since. 146 kilometres an hour was the highest wind speed that was recorded at Wilson's Prom this morning. 113 kilometres an hour was recorded in the inner city in the St Kilda Marina. Now, the SES has been extremely busy tending to requests for help. They've had more than 2,000 calls for help and 1,700 for trees down. Tim Weebush, the SES COO, spoke to ABC earlier. Here's what he had to say.
Seeing damaging to destructive winds across Victoria in the early hours from about 1 a.m. through to about 6 a.m. this morning. That's resulted in just over 1,900 requests for assistance now, and we did see wind gusts of up to 113 kilometres along the Bayside suburbs, over 100 kilometres quite widespread in southern and mountain districts, and 130 kilometres an hour up on the Alpine peaks. So certainly a very windy night, and we're still seeing an influx of calls this morning as people start heading off to work or school or other activities.
And parts of the state are still in a severe wind warning for the 10th consecutive day. There's a watch and act for the southwest for storm surges, and in the northeast ranges, that's for preparing to shelter. There's still tens of thousands of properties across Victoria that are also without power, and it could be days before we have that restored to them. It's looking like this wind will continue, and hopefully we'll get some reprieve this evening.
Mietta Adams there in Melbourne, and we'll get the latest on Hobart shortly. Let's go to Sydney though. A total fire ban is in place for parts of the South Coast and Greater Sydney regions today. Adrian Reardon joins us now from Sydney. Adrian, why is the fire ban in place?
Okay, well, we've got winds and we've got warm temperatures and we've got dryness. So putting that all together, it is not a good day for bushfires, and that's why the New South Wales Rural Fire Service has issued a total fire ban for the Greater Sydney and Illawarra Shoalhaven regions. Now, the wind has been relatively all right in Sydney, at least this morning. In other parts of the state, I think it's caused a little bit of chaos for power outages and that sort of thing. But for the most part, the wind is expected to now pick up in the next hour or so. There's a severe weather warning for damaging winds for a large chunk of New South Wales, actually, from about Sydney all the way down south to the Victorian border, as far inland as the Snowy Mountains and the Central Tablelands and the Hunter. We could see wind travel as fast as 60 to 70 kilometres per hour from mid-morning through until the afternoon. We could see gusts of up to 100 kilometres per hour. Even 110 kilometre per hour is possible at higher elevations. So it's certainly a windy day ahead, and things are going to be ramping up within the next hour or so. There's about 36 fires that the New South Wales RFS is keeping an eye on in New South Wales, 5 of which are yet to be contained, but there's no threats. Staff here at the New South Wales RFS headquarters in Sydney, more have been coming in, starting their shifts, keeping an eye on things. Touch wood, it stays relatively calm, but they are keeping an eye on the situation. And in fact, we caught up with the inspector of the RFS, Ben Shepherd, to hear more about what's in store for the day ahead and just general advice for landholders in the area in relation to those 2 total fire bans. Here's what he had to say.
Most importantly today, please do not use fire out in the open. What we don't want to see is any escape of any fires. Equally as well, if you have done burns in the last few days, go and check on them, make sure they're completely out. Under today's conditions, those areas that do require permits, they are suspended. Please do not try and light up in these conditions, because that will be incredibly dangerous. So we just need people to check, jump on the RFS website, all the conditions and where the permits are required are on there, but keep yourself informed as well across the day.
So spring is certainly here. We saw those warmer temperatures, especially across New South Wales last week. It's officially spring, 2 days into spring, and here we are with these total fire bans. Who could believe it? For the Greater Sydney and Illawarra, Shoalhaven regions, and a lot of people along the New South Wales East Coast, they're familiar with winds, especially in spring, right? But it's just this combination of hotter, drier weather with the winds that the RFS is, taking those extra precautions to minimise bushfire risk.
Adrian Reardon there in Sydney. Thank you. Let's get a check-in of this weather now with Nate Byrne. Nate, a lot happening. What's the latest?
It's been a wild night, Gemma, morning. Through the southeast, we've seen gusts getting as high as 156 kilometres an hour. These are the kind of winds you'd normally associate with a Category 2 cyclone going through. Widespread warnings remain in place this morning. South Australia, this huge swathe of Victoria, up through the southeast of New South Wales, well beyond Sydney and Newcastle as well. You'll be feeling the winds a good ways northwards. Large parts of Tassie too for the west, and of course the Bass Strait Islands, all dealing with these damaging winds. Now also in here we've got some concern for those coastal waters around Victoria. We'd likely see those damaging surf conditions higher than, or abnormally higher than normal tides. This has, even outside of this warning area, still an effect further north with very gusty conditions through much of southern New South Wales, even though it's just below that warning threshold. The other thing we're keeping a close eye on with this is, of course, the rain. Now Tasmania, I know you're going to get there soon. It has been soaking over the weekend. Not huge totals, but enough. Like we've seen pushing over 70 millimetres since 9 a.m. this morning for some. Enough to see significant riverine rises, and we are now very much sitting at major flood levels on the Derwent below Meadowbank Dam, and some warnings remain in place further afield, minor to major flooding, widespread flood watches too. Now the rain is going to continue further north. It's all about the wind, and New South Wales, there's that area Adrian was talking about. Sydney looking at high fire danger for the greater metro area. Further south, extreme conditions on for the Illawarra and Shoalhaven, so widespread fire bans in force there. It's going to be a hectic day, but I've got some relatively good news, Gemma. This system is moving away, so things are going to ease later on in the southeastern corner, but already in South Australia we're starting to see the winds backing off, things drying up in Adelaide this morning. But we'll keep a close eye there, because even though it's below those warning areas, it's still pretty gusty, and trees and structures are essentially loosened over after the weekend of wild winds. So not quite done with this yet.
Yeah, Nate, great to check in with you there. Thank you. And as we heard from Nate, a number of warnings in Tasmania. It's also beginning a soaking there. We're going to go to our Hobart reporter now. Now, Selena Ross, how have things developed overnight in Tasmania?
So, Gemma, we're still trying to get a clearer picture of whether there were any homes inundated here in New Norfolk, which is on the banks of the River Derwent, or further upriver where some of the more major flood warnings were. So that major flood warning is still in place for towns further upriver from where we are in New Norfolk. Here, there's a Watch and Act warning in place, and there are also Watch and Act warnings for other river areas around the state, right around in all the different 3 regions of Tasmania. There are Watch and Act warnings in place for flooding. Here, the river has been really fast-paced moving through New Norfolk. We've seen entire trees just moving down through the river. And we spoke to the Mayor earlier. She said that there were about 70 properties last night where SES members were going through and asking people to evacuate. The Mayor told us that there were some people who decided to stay in place in their homes, and she was quite concerned about them being cut off as the floodwaters do rise with this continuing rain. As you can see here, the river is already so swollen, and all the rivers that come off it and streams. There is really still a flood risk that is continuing throughout today. And so the concern is that those properties will get cut off and be isolated. Some of them are already without power. There are around 40,000 customers without power in Tasmania right across the state. There are still damaging winds continuing in the north and west. So this situation really is still continuing in Tasmania throughout today, and people really are being asked to be vigilant, to pay attention to the alerts that are coming out, and particularly to listen to those evacuation warnings that are coming through before people do get cut off.
Yeah, and we'll be speaking to Tasmania's SES shortly. Selena Ross there, thank you. Now, a search and rescue operation resumes today for a teenage boy swept off the coast of a popular South Australian tourist town. Reporter Sophie Holder is in Victor Harbour and joins us now. Sophie, what have police said?
Good morning. Yes, well, police have said that a search and rescue this morning has resumed for a boy who was seen to be swept off of the coast here at Victor Harbour yesterday. Now, emergency services, including SAPOL, Pol Air and also local sea squadrons, were called to the area yesterday close to Granite Island. They were called around 3:15 p.m. after that boy was seen to be swept into the ocean. Victor Harbour was seen to fall into the ocean, rather. Victor Harbour here is around 80 kilometres south of Adelaide. It's a really popular tourism town, and the location here is at Granite Island, which just behind me is separated from the mainland by a causeway. Now, this has happened, as we can see, in some pretty severe weather. There's a lot of wind. We've seen rain this morning as well. It's starting to clear up now, though. There is a severe weather warning in place for damaging wind across southern parts or southeastern parts of the state here. Now, officer in charge of the Hills Fleurieu local area superintendent Joanne Howard has thanked the local community and those emergency services for their efforts. She says that those local emergency services will be supporting the efforts today. We've seen the State Emergency Service and the SAPOL heading across the causeway here, so I will be staying tuned for any further updates.
Reporter Sophie Holder there in Victor Harbour. Thank you. Overseas now, and hundreds of thousands of Israeli workers have protested in the streets in an attempt to pressure the government to make a hostage deal in Gaza. The outpouring of public rage comes after 6 hostages were found murdered in Gaza at the weekend. Middle East correspondent Alison Horn has this report from Jerusalem.
All across the country, Israelis are taking to the streets in protests like these. You can feel there's this deep sense of rage and anger here at the Israeli government. This one here is outside the Prime Minister's office of Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. They're angry after the announcement that 6 hostages, the bodies of 6 hostages, were recovered from a tunnel in southern Gaza. And the military says they were alive up to a few days ago and killed by Hamas. Now, Hamas is claiming they were killed during Israeli airstrikes, but among the dead is Hirsch Goldberg Poland, an American Israeli who has really become the face of a worldwide hostage release campaign. And the anger here is about a lack of progress on securing a hostage release and ceasefire deal. Many citizens, including people here and the families of hostages, feel the Israeli government has abandoned the hostages. The opposition in Israel has called Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet the cabinet of death. And the people here say that the blood of these hostages is on the hands of Benjamin Netanyahu for not securing a hostage release deal with Hamas.
We are accuse our government of murdering them, directly accuse our government of murdering these people. Of course, the finger on the trigger was Hamas, but the person behind these murders is our Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu.
These are citizens who were taken out of their homes, out of their beds, in their pajamas, or after the party, or from their base where they were sleeping as well, because it was 6:29 in the morning, and it could have been any one of us. I live in Jerusalem, could happen in Jerusalem as well. So if the government couldn't protect us then, it should leave. The government should resign. They should all resign, and we should have elections, and someone should come who can protect us.
But Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu denies he is the obstruction to a deal being made.
Whoever murders hostages does not want a deal.
Here outside the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem, there's such a deep sense of anger and grief, but also a prevailing feeling that the government needs to make a hostage deal now, no matter the cost, to get the remaining captives out.
A former Israeli diplomat, Alon Pinkas, is in Tel Aviv and has been at the protests. He says it is difficult to determine how Benjamin Netanyahu will react, if at all, to this mounting pressure.
Like his entire approach, he's been arrogant and conceited and aloof and indifferent and completely impervious, seemingly impervious to all of it. That doesn't mean he is not frightened. That doesn't mean he is not rattled. That doesn't mean he is not riled by what's going on. And that most importantly, it doesn't mean that he is not apprehensive of the political implications, because the defense minister is going full steam against him on the hostage deal, but conceivably also on the political side. Not to mention the possibility that what you saw in Israel today and what you will see tomorrow could have an effect on how the Americans pressure him. And so the combination or the confluence of all these pressures spell a very unpleasant period. He may think he may survive this because the public is too jaded, too dejected, too depleted in terms of energy, but he may be proven wrong.
It was former Israeli diplomat Alon Pinkas there. We're going to bring you my full interview with him later in the show. Now, the far-right Alternative for Germany party is on course for a victory in a regional election for the first time. Early predictions suggest the AfD will take about 33% of the vote in Thuringia in the east of the country. And if it happens, it will be the far-right's first win in a state parliament since World War II.
It's written on their faces how some feel about the far right winning the most votes in a state election for the first time in the post-war era.
News of the result has just been announced here at this anti-AfD demo. As you can hear, boos in the crowd. And just over there is the state parliament, where the far right will now have greater influence.
Right now, the fascists over here are winning. I'm not a fan of saying history is repeating itself, because I don't think so, but history sometimes is similar, and that's what's happening over here right now.
I am totally worried. Actually, of course, next year also we have like the total German elections for the German parliament. So I'm kind of like seeing this as like a test for how it will work next year as well.
This is Alternative for Deutschland's leader in Thuringia, a lightning rod for controversy. Björn Höcker's been fined twice for knowingly using a Nazi slogan, something he denied. Here he declares a historic victory. Celebrations and AfD video footage because the media wasn't allowed in by a party that often claims it's being persecuted and smeared. In the former communist East, this region is an AfD stronghold, where the party's policies of ending weapons aid to Ukraine and a tough anti-immigration message are gaining traction.
The politicians have promised a lot, particularly regarding migrants and foreigners, and nothing happened. Nothing.
Because of Germany's history, some people are really worried about the rise of the far right.
Germany's history, that's what it is. History. We live in the here and now.
In Thuringia's capital this weekend, a night run for the public. While the AFD's on the march, it'll probably be excluded from power as other parties won't work alongside it. But the result's a marker of change in Germany by more than a flicker.
Okay, let's go back to Tasmania now, where there are emergency warnings in place in many areas as record wind gusts and major flooding continues there. Mick Lowe is the SES Tasmania's Executive Director, and he joins us now from Hobart. Mick Lowe, thank you for your time. Firstly, can you tell us about these overnight storms that have smashed the state and the conditions that you're seeing there?
Yeah, look, we've had wild conditions over the past week in Tasmania, in particular over the past 48 hours. We've had damaging and destructive winds over the past 2 nights, and that's caused a lot of storm damage, damaged roofs, blown down trees and debris around the state, which we're managing as we go on.
And what are the worst affected areas, and where are people being urged to evacuate?
Yeah, so we're seeing particularly last night with the north of the state was heavily impacted. There's a lot of power outages that are also being managed. There's also moderate to minor flooding throughout the state. In regards to the flooding situation, the parts of the Derwent River are likely going to receive major flooding this afternoon. We have taken precautionary actions. We've got resources that have been postured, and we've also put a warning out to evacuate those areas. So rural and remote areas that are going to become inundated and isolated.
So how would you say those evacuations are going in those areas, and also those preparations for this flooding?
Yeah, certainly. We got on the front foot early yesterday. We were doing a lot of door knocking, making sure people were tracking the conditions that were coming. We issued the warning last night. We understand about half of those residents have now left their houses. We continue to encourage people to leave the area. Houses will become inundated, and there are going to be a lot of houses in those rural communities that are going to become isolated over the next 24 to 48 hours.
Now, you mentioned a moment ago the nature of some of those calls that you're receiving. What about the numbers, and have there been any injuries?
Yeah, look, so in the past 24 hours, we've received over 340 requests for assistance from an SES perspective. That is significant for a small jurisdiction like ours. We have had to be very careful. It's been very dangerous and challenging conditions for our amazing volunteers that are out there responding to the community, and we have had to restrict some of their actions to keep them off roofs during the high wind events. But thankfully, there's only been a couple of minor injuries for SES personnel, but we continue to be very cautious and manage fatigue across the state.
And there have been some issues with the 000 outages. What about SES calls? Are all those who are trying to get through to you doing so?
Yes, they are. The issue that we're facing at the moment is just the sheer volume, so we are having to triage calls. We understand that there are a number of calls that are outstanding at the moment. We continue to work through those, and we'll do so throughout today and into this evening.
And what about the power outages that you mentioned? Are they hampering any of the SES efforts?
Yeah, it just makes it a more complicated situation that we're facing across the state. I know Tas Networks are working hard to restore power. It is challenging conditions for them as well, because they're in the middle of them trying to restore power. They've had a further wind event overnight, but hopefully that will recover throughout today.
And so looking ahead in terms of what's forecast, what are your bigger concerns?
Yeah, so in the short term, we will receive some further gusty conditions and potential damaging winds today, especially through this afternoon. Then we'll get a bit of a reprieve from the wind perspective, and then we will see some river level rises over the next 24 to 48 hours, which we're monitoring very, very closely. Our key concern, though, is the Derwent River, and we're anticipating that areas in around Meadowbank and Macquarie Plains will get peak conditions of those river systems into major flooding this evening between late afternoon and midnight tonight.
Mick Lowe, the SES Tasmania's Executive Director, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Gemma.
Actor George Clooney has paid tribute to US President Joe Biden over his decision to step aside from November's election after an opinion piece by the actor in July ramped up pressure on him to drop out. Clooney's New York Times op-ed in the wake of the disastrous debate with Donald Trump said that Biden was no longer the same person who won the White House in 2020.
You know, it's very hard to let go of power. You know, we know that. We've seen it, you know, all around the world. And for someone to say, I think there's a better way forward, that's all the credit goes to him. And that's really the truth. And all the rest of it will be long gone and forgotten.
Now, tonight on Four Corners, a compelling documentary shedding light on the rising tensions in the South China Sea. It examines the broader implications, including deepening ties between the Philippines and Australia, highlighted by a landmark defence deal.
In March 2024, Australia was among several countries to register concerns about China's actions. Australian government statements about the South China Sea are nothing new, but analysts say this one was unusually explicit in attributing responsibility to China. When President Marcos visited Canberra, the Australian government gave him the platform to address Parliament.
For both of us, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea is not an abstract notion or a theoretical question. Freedom of navigation is fundamental to our sovereignty, our prosperity, our security, and our territorial integrity. Our cooperation is an assertion of our national interest and a recognition of our regional responsibility. It reflects our shared understanding that peace depends on more than the presence of the great powers. All of us in the international community, middle powers like our two nations, as well as smaller nations, have our part to play in building a more stable, peaceful, and prosperous future.
The challenges that we face may be formidable, but equally formidable is our resolve. We will not yield.
And I commend you for your personal resolve, Mr. President, for you and your country's courage in calling out acts of coercion and the Philippines' steadfast commitment to international law.
They announced the enhanced defence program to provide more maritime cooperation between the two countries.
And you can see that story tonight on Four Corners on ABC TV and then anytime on ABC iView. It's time to check in on the weather with Nate Byrne. Nate, what is the update on this wild weather in the southeast?
It's very much continuing to blow this morning for large parts of southeastern Australia. Gemma, morning. Keep an eye on this frontal system that's been blasting through. Now, some relatively good news at the moment. Things are already starting to ease a little bit from the west, but still warnings on through large parts of South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, Tasmania too, for these damaging winds to continue through the day today. Mostly 100 to 110 kilometre an hour gusts, but we're not ruling out seeing more destructive winds at 130 kilometres an hour plus. It's really been about the sustained winds with this though, because these winds have been on and off all weekend, and we've got another full day of some pretty gusty conditions for large parts of the southeast, although generally we will see it backing off. We are not done with it yet, and we're not done with the rain either. Tassie's been dealing with that. Minor to major flooding now occurring in parts of Tasmania. Widespread warnings and watches still remain in place there because there's more wet weather on the way as well. We'll keep a close eye on the situation, but we've also got some hazardous surf, and we're also dealing with increased fire danger for New South Wales, total fire bans, Greater Sydney and the Shoalhaven and Illawarra, where we've got extreme fire danger on today, Gemma. So plenty going on to keep an eye on.
And tell us a bit more about that weather on the way. What is the outlook?
Okay, so we've got a high coming in that's actually helping to settle things down pretty quickly. So tomorrow, the southeast should actually have a break, but we'll be watching this next frontal system. It doesn't bring a heck of a lot of rain until it gets into the southeast, where Tassie once again will get a decent drop out of it. This one lays a little bit more east-west though, so we're going to see some totals picking up through parts of the south of the nation that we haven't seen with these past few frontal systems. Not huge totals by any means, but a drop across much of the country, Gemma. The other thing has been the heat. We're keeping a very close eye on it, still gathering through the north down into the south of the country. We get a bit of a cooler burst now. Actually, I need to change this to spring, don't I? But we're going to get that heat returning pretty soon. This is concerning. We're watching fire dangers through the outlook too.
And can you take us around the states?
All right, let's get into it. Queensland, we'll start with you. Sunny blue skies almost right across the board. Just some showers for the east coast, north of about Ingham, mostly north of Cohen on the peninsula there. Everyone else is fine. Bit of haze in the southeast this morning from smoke. Brisbane, you've got a fine one. It's getting to 33 degrees. In New South Wales, gusty and wet in the south of the state, and those winds are getting all the way up through to the central ranges and to central parts of the coast too, including you, Sydney. You're staying sunny though, getting to 25. Further south, Canberra's only aiming for 14. Windy there, but it should stay dry. Further south, and it's definitely about the wind right across the board, even outside of those warning areas. Showers too through parts of southern Victoria in particular, including around Melbourne. You're getting to 14 degrees. It's not really till this evening that we'll see the winds backing off below those warning levels. In Tassie, much the same. The rain has already eased back to showers for the most part, and that'll continue to clear through the day. Hobart's getting to 12. That wind will hopefully ease tonight. For Adelaide, the winds are starting to ease a bit earlier than that. This is well enough behind that frontal system. Still gusty, but things are certainly drying up. It's getting to 17 in the city. Meanwhile, over in WA, I actually get to take a break for today. Sunny and 25 in Perth. We've got a gorgeous, pretty typical day ahead. Up north, though, we're back to all that heat. There's just a little bit of shower activity for the western parts of the top end. Gemma, for Darwin, it's a fine day. Pretty warm, though, getting to 35.
Thanks, Nate. This is ABC News. Our top stories. A woman has died after a tree fell on a cabin near the Victoria-New South Wales border as heavy rain and cyclone-strength winds batter the country's southeast. Tens of thousands of homes in Victoria are without power, and the SES has received over 1,600 calls for help, including nearly 350 for building damage. A watch and act warning remains in place for Melbourne and surrounding areas. Meanwhile, in Tasmania, an emergency warning remains in place for the Derwent River, and affected residents are being urged to evacuate now. Roads are likely to become inundated by floodwaters and become inaccessible. More than 38,000 households and businesses remain without power. Communities along the Forth River in the northwest should be preparing to leave. Thousands of Israeli protesters have taken to the streets demanding a ceasefire deal be reached with Hamas to bring the remaining hostages home from Gaza. They've labelled Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a murderer for failing to get the hostages released. The protest came after the Israeli army recovered the bodies of 6 hostages in southern Gaza. The Ukrainian city of Kharkiv has come under heavy attack from at least 10 Russian missiles. The strikes hit locations including a shopping mall and a sports complex, injuring more than 40 people, including 5 children. Earlier, Russia downed more than 150 Ukrainian drones in one of the biggest aerial attacks of the war. Dozens of people have been injured in a series of Russian airstrikes on the northeastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv. This man indicates he's fine moments after being freed from the rubble of an events hall struck by missiles. A shopping centre was also hit. 5 children are among the wounded. The latest attack has prompted Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky to renew calls on allies to allow Kyiv to fire Western-supplied weapons deeper into Russia to reduce Moscow's military threat on his country.
Russia has once again brutally attacked Kharkiv. As of now, almost 50 people have been injured. Everyone is receiving the necessary assistance. Rescuers continue to clear the rubble, and there are reports of people trapped beneath it. The targets were ordinary civilian structures, a shopping mall, a sports centre, and residential buildings.
Destroyed grain trucks lay next to the main highway on the 200-kilometre stretch from Kharkiv to Sumy after a convoy came under attack. 1 driver was killed and 4 others injured.
There was one hit from the sky. We hid under a trailer. Everyone was scared. It seemed to be quiet. After 2 to 3 minutes, the next one hit, and the car caught fire. We rushed to put it out. It was impossible. There are no words, no words.
Over the border in Russia, smoke billows from a fire at a power station after Ukraine launched a wave of drones targeting Russian energy plants and a refinery near Moscow. The Kremlin says it destroyed more than 150 drones fired by Kyiv in one of the biggest attacks of the war. Authorities in Russia's southern Belgorod district say one person has been killed and almost a dozen more injured by Ukrainian shelling. Kyiv launched its surprise incursion in the neighbouring Kursk region last month and now occupies dozens of settlements, but its progress appears to have slowed. More than 130,000 people have been evacuated from Russian border zones.
We thought that it was literally for one evening, that we would return home that day. So we left, only with documents. We did not take anything with us at all. We left without things. Then it turned out that we will not return home anytime soon.
Elsewhere, near the front line of the conflict in the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia, there is some joy as children celebrate the traditional first day of school with a parade. Large gatherings are banned in the city, so only students in their first and final years were allowed to take part. With war on their doorstep, students study a week in person and the other online because the school's bomb shelter can only accommodate 250 people.
Because of the Russian aggression, children needed to study at their homes. When they tried to go to school last year, they were taught in the bunker. It is still an incomplete education. We are positive looking into the future. We are still happy that the children have the chance to go to the celebration today, the same as it was in the pre-war times. This is really exciting and joyful.
Let's get more now with Stephen Biddle, who is a Professor of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University and an Adjunct Senior Fellow for Defence Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. He joins us now from New York. Professor Biddle, thank you for your time. How significant is this escalation? So one of Ukraine's biggest ever drone attacks on Russia as Russia bombarded Ukraine's second city of Kharkiv.
Yeah, Ukraine is locked in an attritional war against a larger opponent, so they're looking for some way to try and break out of that with some kind of action that might unfreeze what is, from the Ukrainian standpoint, a largely frozen front. One of the ways they've been doing that is by attacking deep targets in Russia, and especially Russian energy targets, refineries, power stations, in an attempt partly to increase the costs of the war for Russia, reduce their ability to fuel their forces, but also put political pressure on Putin to try and compromise. It's an understandable response. Russia has been striking Ukraine's energy industry for well over a year. Russia has been striking apartment blocks, perfectly innocent civilian targets on the Ukrainian side of the border. It's natural for the Ukrainians to want to try to retaliate. The question is whether or not the retaliation can actually break a largely deadlocked war and change the situation on the ground in any meaningful way.
Well, the US isn't budging on denying the supply of long-range weaponry for this war, despite Kyiv insisting that this could turn the tide. What calculations are at play here for the US, and is this a controversial stance?
Well, it's been very controversial. The Ukrainians largely believe that the United States is exaggerating the risk of Russian escalation, and thus that they're restricting Ukraine's capabilities in exchange for nothing. The Biden administration, facing the responsibility for a potential nuclear war, if it would happen, however low the odds might be, tends to view this threat more seriously than the Ukrainians do. There's also just the problem of costs. U.S. aid to Ukraine by U.S. law is dollar limited. There's a cap on how much money we can spend on assistance to Ukraine. Long-range weapons that can reach deep targets like oil refineries deep in sovereign Russia cost more. The more you spend on deep strike weapons with the range to reach targets at these kinds of distances, the fewer weapons you can buy, and the more of an opportunity cost it imposes against other kinds of aid we could be providing, like artillery shells, other kinds of ammunition, logistical support, combat vehicles. There are a lot of things we could give to Ukraine. If we give them deep strike capability, I think the Biden administration is concerned that giving them expensive weapons means giving them fewer weapons. And hence, whether those expensive weapons have a payoff that's worth it is an important question with respect to Ukraine's ability to defend itself.
What's your assessment of what's happening in the Kursk region now, and will Ukraine be able to hold this territory for negotiation purposes?
Yeah, Kursk is another classic example of a Ukrainian effort to break out of a fairly stable war of attrition by doing something risky. They're fighting against an opponent that outnumbers them. Their troops are spread thin over an enormously long frontier. It's a risky gambit to concentrate a substantial number of troops that are scarce and devote them against a part of the front that had been quiet. There hadn't been much fighting up at Kursk. Now, they haven't articulated exactly what they think their aim is in doing this. It's presumably some combination of persuade the Russians to ease the pressure on Ukrainian defenses in the Donbass by shifting forces north to oppose this Ukrainian offensive in Kursk. It may be intended as a bargaining chip in future negotiations to get the Russians to give up Ukrainian territory in exchange for Ukraine withdrawing from the sovereign Russian territory that's occupying Kursk. It may be an attempt to generate trades of prisoners. The Ukrainians have captured several hundred Russian prisoners of war. They may be hoping that they can generate pressure on the Russians to release some Ukrainian prisoners of war. And it's presumably an effort to try and embarrass Putin politically and possibly put pressure on him to negotiate a more tolerable settlement. So far, there has been a prisoner exchange. That part has worked. On the other hand, the Russians have not eased the pressure in Donbass. They're continuing to advance against outnumbered Ukrainian defenders there. Russia's position seems to be that it's simply going to ignore the threat in Kursk and continue the offensive in the part of the theater that they value the most. If Ukraine's goal is to ease the pressure in the Donbass, so far at least, that hasn't happened.
Professor Stephen Biddle from Columbia University, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thousands of Israeli protesters have taken to the streets demanding their Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, reach a ceasefire deal with Hamas to bring the remaining hostages home. This comes after the Israeli army recovered the bodies of 6 hostages held by Hamas in southern Gaza. The head of Israel's main labour union has called for a general strike later today to pressure the government to reach a deal. Former Israeli diplomat Alon Pinkas is in Tel Aviv and has been at the protests. I spoke to him a short time ago.
It's anger. It's mostly anger and frustration, and it just it was unleashed en masse. I think you will see different figures. I know that area. I've been in many of those demonstrations during the constitutional coup that Mr. Netanyahu instigated last year, and in the beginning of the war, when there were still demonstrations about 10 or 11 months ago, I would say that there were roughly 300, 400,000 people that filled that entire place and streets around that particular juncture. It was mostly anger. It was frustration that's been built for months and weeks around a yes, no, perhaps, maybe, when hostage deal.
And Alon, this is not the first time the families of the hostages have had their worst fears realised. Would you say, though, that there's been a profound shift here?
That's a good question. Because some people say, okay, this was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, and this is the proverbial tipping point, and this is the proverbial point of inflection. We don't know. And because the question is not the size of the demonstration today, and it was huge by any standard, but the issue is going to be, will it be sustained? Will there be ongoing demonstrations, maybe not this big, but on a similar size and scope? If there are, this spells political trouble for Mr. Netanyahu, who not many people thought he would survive this debacle of October 7th, and he's still there 11 months later. But now it seems that the public anger is such that, it's overspilling. Whether or not it'll be sustained, I don't know.
Tell us about the union strike. What's proposed?
Well, look, there have been calls for the chairman of the Trade Union Association, which is an amalgamation of many unions, teachers and postal workers and drivers and technicians and doctors and what have you, all under one roof, a federation of trade unions. There were calls for him to join the protest way back last year around the constitutional coup and the political unrest, and he refused. There was one time where he budged and there was a strike. Now, under pressure from the business community and from the big employers, the huge companies that employ tens of thousands of people, they pressured him into joining the protest and the demonstration against the background of those 6 hostages who were found dead, executed by Hamas. And he finally said yes. And this strike is going to take place tomorrow, today in Australia. But here's the thing. Just like the demonstration itself, even the strike is going to be judged by the sustainability. Now, no one expects a strike to go on for a week or a month or several months. But if the trade unions turn the strike into a political weapon to force a change of policy, that could be critical. Will that happen? Just like the size of the demonstrations, I don't know.
And given these unknowns, is it hard to gauge how Netanyahu will react to this?
Look, he's like his entire approach. He's been arrogant and conceited and conceited and aloof and indifferent and completely impervious, seemingly impervious to all of it. That doesn't mean he is not frightened. That doesn't mean he is not rattled. That doesn't mean he is not riled by what's going on. And that most importantly, it doesn't mean that he is not apprehensive of the political implications, because the defense minister is going full steam against him on the hostage deal, but conceivably also on the political side. Not to mention the possibility that what you saw in Israel today and what you will see tomorrow could have an effect on how the Americans pressure him. And so the combination or the confluence of all these pressures spell a very unpleasant period. He may think he may survive this because the public is too jaded, too dejected, too depleted in terms of energy, but he may be proven wrong.
So, Alon, where does it stand now in terms of how many hostages are still in Gaza and how many are believed to still be alive?
Well, the numbers I'll give you are obviously very difficult to verify, and I certainly can't verify them independently. Israel believes there are 100 hostages still remaining in Hamas captivity. Of them, the working assumption is that anywhere between 25 and 50 are alive. That doesn't say anything about the medical condition of those who are alive, but we have to assume that at least half of them are alive. But in terms of how we treat this as a country, the number is 100.
Alon Pincus, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
There's been more success overnight for Australia at the Paralympics, with medals in para swimming and para rowing. ABC national sport reporter David Mark and reporter Charles Bryce have been watching all the action in Paris.
We're at the end of another day of competition here in Paris, and it's been yet another successful day for the Australians. But David, it hasn't been without some controversy.
There's been so much, Charles. Probably the biggest one was Ahmed Kelly, who swims in the 150-metre medley, the SM3 class. He was disqualified in qualification this morning because basically a fundamental error by one of the officials, who said that he wasn't swimming the required stroke in one of his strokes. Now, the stroke in question, I believe, was the freestyle. You're allowed to do whatever you want. It's called freestyle because you're free to choose your style. You can do whatever you want, which is what Ahmed was doing. But the official said, no, that's not the correct freestyle. There is no correct freestyle.
Well, I had a chat with him after his race in the final, and he said that he was deemed to be swimming butterfly, which is one of the strokes you're not allowed to swim in the freestyle. So speaking with him after his race in the final, he said that appeals process which he went through was overturned in in his favour, claiming second in the finals. He said that the distraction of the appeals process, it didn't hinder his finals race. He was still able to swim a magnificent race and come second.
Yeah, and to put all that out of his mind after, having to go through that process and come second, he was leading until about 15, 20 metres to go, but then he was run down by a German racer. But his great mate, Grant Patterson, came in third, which was where they came in Tokyo. So Ahmed got second in Tokyo, Patterson third. So they doubled up, so that's pretty cool. So that was one of the silver and bronzes in the pool, and we had another one with Rowan Carruthers and Tom Gallagher. I think Rowan was probably slightly upset. He's the world champion, and I think immediately after the race he was kind of looking at all the things that where he could have, made up those few fractions of a second. But it was a very close race. And Tom Gallagher getting third, of course, after he won gold in the 50-metre free. So a really good meet for him.
Rowan Carruthers, he had a bit of swagger going out onto the pool deck. He was wearing his Akruba that all the athletes were given as part of their uniform. So that was a success in the pool. Looking at the para rowing, there was also success, also controversy.
There was indeed. So we should start with the success, of course. So Nikki Ayres and Jed Ortschwiger in the PR3, the mixed doubles. It's the first time that this event has ever been at a Paralympic Games. They won the gold medal, so they get the first gold medal in this particular event. And it's actually the first time Australia's won a gold medal in rowing at the Paralympics, which I find really amazing. It's been around since 2008, and Australia's got such a rich history in rowing. You'd think we would have won a gold medal at some point, but no, this is the first.
I was really surprised by that as well. We could only manage one gold on the water, but we scored a bronze in a pretty unique way.
So Eric Horry in his event crossed the line in fourth spot behind an Italian rower who, as it turned out, had a mobile phone in his boat. You're not allowed to have mobile phones in the boat. No communication devices. He did. The officials found out. And so Eric, thinking, okay, I've just missed out, actually got a bronze medal. Pretty cool.
The Steelers, the wheelchair rugby team, up against Japan. In the semi-final, they needed to win to go into the gold medal match. They couldn't quite get over the line. They were looking good for the most of the match, really.
Well, we were both there, and they had a 2-try lead in the final quarter. And I guess the question has to be asked, did they blow it? Because they had the game under their control, but they made 2 errors, really, and that cost them the game. The first error was in the last minute of regulation time. They needed to score a try. They were sort of holding onto the ball and trying to run down the clock, and in the end, they lost possession.
And Emma Rambalado has the rest of the day's sport.
Well, let's start with the women's draw, and third seed Coco Gauff is out of the tournament. She came back from a set down, but she ended up losing to fellow American 13th seed Emma Navarro in 3 sets. Earlier, Paula Badosa had a comfortable straight sets win over China's Yafan Wang to move into the quarterfinals. In the men's draw, 9th seed Grigor Dimitrov has beaten 6th seed Andrei Rublev. Dimitrov won the first 2 sets before Rublev fought back to take the 3rd and 4th, sending the match into a deciding 5th set, but the Bulgarian prevailed. And American Taylor Fritz has won his round of 16 match, coming back from a set down to beat Casper Ruud in 4. And good news for Aussies doubles pair Max Purcell and Jordan Thompson. They are through to the quarterfinals. In NRL, the Roosters are counting the cost of a horror day yesterday, with their premiership tilt suffering some brutal blows in their loss to the Raiders. Sam Walker went down with an awful knee injury just minutes into the match, while Brandon Smith was injured in a hip drop tackle, and back rower Victor Radley hurt his shoulder. The Roosters staged a fight back, but they just couldn't get it done. They went down 14-12 to the Raiders. In the other match yesterday, the Knights beat the Titans 36-14, meaning the final round will decide who makes the finals, with the Knights taking on the Dolphins in a huge final match. In the NRLW, some breathing space for the Broncos and the Knights on the ladder. They both picked up crucial wins with 3 rounds to go. Newcastle had a comfortable win over bottom-placed West Tigers. In the other match, Brisbane won the Queensland Derby, prevailing 38-12 against the Cowboys. The AFL has this morning announced it will award the Ron Barassi Medal to the Premiership-winning captain on Grand Final Day, starting this year. The 6-time Melbourne Premiership player and 4-time flag-winning coach died last September at the age of 87. The medal will be awarded alongside the Norm Smith Medal for Best on Field and the Jock McHale Hale Medal presented to the premiership winning coach. Well, some big results in the opening round of the AFLW. First up, revenge for North Melbourne in what started as a fiery grand final rematch. The Roos thumping premiers Brisbane by 44 points. North Melbourne led by 12 points at half-time, but then kicked 6 unanswered goals in the third term, confining the Lions to its heaviest ever defeat. The Roos putting the competition on notice. In yesterday's other game, Hawthorn enjoyed its biggest ever win, beating Carlton by 38 points. There was a podium finish this morning for Australian Oscar Piastri. He came second in the Italian Grand Prix, but Charles Leclerc gave Ferrari a stunning home win. Piastri had started second on the grid behind his McLaren teammate Lando Norris, but took the lead in the opening lap. Both McLarens made 2 stops during the race, but Leclerc and Ferrari decided on a bold one-stop strategy, and it worked. Leclerc taking the checkered flag, sending the Italian crowd wild with celebrations. And in MotoGP, this is huge. Marc Marquez has taken out the Aragon Grand Prix in Spain. Now, this is his first win in almost 3 years. The 6-time MotoGP world champion led from start to finish, delivering a Grand Prix win for Ducati for the very first time. 24 hours earlier, he won the sprint race there. Marquez's previous victory was at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix back in October 2021, and this is his 60th MotoGP win.
Thanks, Emma. And it's time to check the weather now with Nate Byrne. Nate, people in the southeast being told to remain on alert. What is the latest on this wild weather?
The winds continue after really picking up overnight. Again, this has been days and days of front after front, Gemma. It's going to be another big day today behind this frontal system. You can see on the satellite picture that's gone through. Damaging winds continue to blow. South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales South, parts of Tasmania's west, as well as the Bass Strait Islands, all under warnings for damaging winds, perhaps even destructive winds continuing. Now, this is moving off through the day today, so conditions should ease, particularly as we get into this evening. But until then, those warnings are likely to stay in place. It's not the only thing we're watching by any means. Rain too for Tasmania in particular, although it's backing off to showers there. We've got minor to major flooding going on across several rivers in the state, and some flood watches still in place as well. So one to watch very closely. We've also got some fire danger, elevated levels for parts of New South Wales. That's again because of the same windy conditions, but here just a little bit warmer. For the Greater Sydney region, high fire danger, extreme further south for the Shoalhaven and Illawarra. Now, after today, things will calm down briefly before the next front comes in Wednesday night into Friday for parts of the southeast. We're expecting to see some pretty decent totals still to come, and it's not the only thing we're watching either. The heat is the other major focus, northern and western parts of the country in particular, still very much above average for where they should be this time of year, and we're expecting to see elevated fire dangers in the days ahead. So plenty to keep me busy. We've got a fine warm one in Brisbane. It's getting to 33 degrees. And then it's all about the wind. Fine and 25 for Sydney, but gusty. Similar in Canberra, but 14 will be your top. Wet and windy then for Melbourne, 14 there. Hobart 2, you're getting to 12. And in Adelaide, it should be a dry day, but still pretty gusty. 17 your maximum. Over in the West, Perth's got a fine 25. Cameron, I don't have to worry too much about Darwin yet. It's a fine 35.
Thanks, Nate. And there's more on the ABC News app and on ABC iView. I'm Gemma Vaness. Coming up on the ABC News channel, we'll have the latest on these weather emergencies in the country's southeast with our reporters on the ground in Victoria and Tasmania. Stay with us. Today, a woman killed and tens of thousands of homes left without power as destructive winds and heavy rain lash Australia's southeast.
A severe warning remains in place in some areas, but those damaging winds are likely to ease across the state later today.
Flood alerts in place for parts of Tasmania with emergency evacuation orders issued for the Derwent and Styx rivers. Hundreds of thousands of Israeli workers prepared to strike, demanding the government reach a hostage release deal with Hamas. A tiger mauls its handler at Dreamworld on the Gold Coast, leaving her with injuries to her arm. And Australia enjoys its most successful day of the Paris Paralympics, adding 10 medals to the tally. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Catherine Robinson. A woman has been killed when a tree fell on a cabin in Moama on the Victoria-New South Wales border as wild and damaging winds wreak havoc across much of southeastern Australia. Tasmania has been bearing the brunt of the weather, with the threat of flooding continuing and evacuation orders issued along the Derwent and Styx rivers. Tasmania and Victoria's state emergency services have responded to thousands of calls, and tens of thousands of residents remain without power. Victorians are being told to stay home and avoid unnecessary travel as storms sweep across the state. Winds are so strong they've been likened to a Category 2 cyclone. However, conditions there are expected to ease by this evening. Now, we have reporters live for us in Melbourne and New Norfolk in Tasmania. But first, let's get the latest information from the Bureau of Meteorology, and Senior Meteorologist Sarah Scully from there joins me now. Hi there, Sarah. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Look, if we can perhaps just start in Victoria. We know that this extreme weather is impacting Tasmania and Victoria, but we just heard from the Victoria SES saying it's been years since the state has seen this type of magnitude of storm. What has it been experiencing, and how much damage has there been from these winds?
Yeah, look, the cold front that's responsible for bringing these really damaging to destructive winds across the state late last night and into early this morning. It moved through the Melbourne area around 2 a.m. and we saw wind gusts in the metropolitan area in excess of 140 kilometres per hour. It then tracked eastwards, and it's just making its way out into the Tasman Sea. So we are in the tail end of the weather event. However, there are still severe weather warnings out for damaging winds that are expected to continue for today and start to ease and gradually ease below warning level by this evening.
Okay, so we've still got the day to bear through before we get to the evening. What about high tides and dangerous surf conditions?
Yeah, we do have a coastal hazard warning for the dangerous and damaging surf, and that's for the west coast of Victoria and the central coast of Victoria, and as well abnormally high tides for Port Phillip Bay, Western Port and Lakes Entrance. We're forecasting Port Phillip Bay to have their high tide and for impacts to be experienced between 3 and 6 p.m. this afternoon, and there may be inundations of low-lying areas, for instance, places like South Bank. For Lakes Entrance, their peak will be this evening from about 6 o'clock through till 8 o'clock, and again there may be inundation of properties throughout that area as well.
Okay, so just what are some of the live weather warnings that you have in place at the moment for Victoria?
So the weather warnings we have at the moment are the wind warnings for damaging winds. It's been reduced. We did have locally destructive. However, we're not expecting winds in excess of 125 kilometres anymore. Now they're being capped between 90 to 100 kilometres per hour. We also have a severe weather warning for eastern parts of New South Wales as well. And we've been seeing those winds start to pick up in the last hour or so. And they extend from the Victorian border all the way up through the south coast, Illawarra, into the Sydney Metro and the Hunter, and we're expecting those gusty winds to continue throughout today and start to ease from mid-afternoon.
Okay, Sally, given you've brought New South Wales in there, I'll ask you about that now. We know that a fire has jumped the Princes Motorway north of Wollongong. With those sorts of winds expected for later in the day, that no doubt is going to cause that problem, that area there, to bring those fires under control quite difficult?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, with the high wind conditions, plus as well, the temperatures are quite warm and there's very dry vegetation. So it's those three contributing factors that create the extreme fire danger, with the fire weather warning out, and the local fire authorities have issued a total fire ban for both the Illawarra and Shoalhaven and the Greater Sydney area.
Okay, moving to Tasmania now. We know that it is bearing the brunt of this system. Can you talk us through the flood warnings for the Derwent River and which areas you're focusing on?
Yeah, look, the Upper Derwent is in major flooding. It reached the major flood level earlier this morning and is just hovering above the major flood level there. There are still showers that are moving across the area that are adding further water to the already swollen catchments. But we are expecting there to be a decrease in the frequency of the showers as we move through today, becoming more isolated into this evening and then easing even further tomorrow as the high pressure system finally moves in.
Okay, we've got the map showing while you're speaking there on Hobart, but even further up there at Launceston and, historic towns like Deloraine, etc., that is also experiencing some extreme weather there with, winds, I believe, up to 130 k's an hour.
That's right. We've just issued another severe weather warning for damaging winds, and that's actually for tomorrow. The winds have eased for the moment across Tasmania. We're expecting them to re-intensify over a small area of the Central Plateau tomorrow. But with regards to the flood warnings, there are minor to moderate flood warnings across various catchments across Tasmania due to these multiple cold fronts that have been bringing these big bursts of showers over the last week. And also we've got a broader flood watch area just because the catchments are so swollen that with any further rainfall added to them, it will respond very quickly.
Yeah, there's a lot going on at the moment across the southeast of Australia. Senior meteorologist at the Bureau, Sarah Scully, thank you for that update.
Thank you.
Well, for more on the wild weather in the southern states, we have reporters Alexandra Alvaro live for us in Melbourne and Adam Langerberg in New Norfolk outside Hobart. We'll begin with Alex, though. Alex, can you take us through the areas hardest hit?
Well, Victorians across the state have woken up to all kinds of damage. Really, no part of the state has been spared, but tragically, this weather event has claimed a life. A 63-year-old woman in Moama on the New South Wales border has passed away after a tree fell on her cabin. Unfortunately, paramedics were unable to save her. So a very stark reminder that these weather events can be deadly and to heed the warnings. But when it comes to what we saw overnight, we saw wind gusts of up to 146 kilometres an hour, likened to, as you say, a category 2 or 3 cyclone. And so with that came, of course, several thousand calls for help. We saw 2,800 calls to help to the SES overnight. And to put that into perspective, since this weather event began last Sunday, we've seen 7,000 calls for help in total. So last night's calls for help made up about half of those. So we did see quite a bit of destruction overnight. I was just at a scene where branches had fallen off trees in a street, downed a power pole and crashed onto a car. We've seen a garage collapse, a roof come down on a house. So everything that you'd expect when you see a weather event like this. When it comes to schools, we know that a couple of government schools have closed due to damage, and that a couple of non-government schools have asked their students to study from home today, just to make sure people aren't moving around the state, because we know that there is the warning that if you can stay home, then you should. And more importantly, there are still 121,000 homes without power. Now, the Premier spoke about this a little bit earlier. Let's take a listen.
Crews are out there on the ground right now, working as quickly as they can, but also only working in areas where it's safe to do so to restore power as quickly as possible. In terms of telecommunications, I'm advised that almost 700 Telstra fixed line customers are unable to make or receive calls. Work is going on, being led by Minister Gabrielle Williams across a working group of telco and power companies. We know in these instances those two organisations need to coordinate their response.
Now, Alex, that was a lengthy media conference where you had a huge update, not just from the Premier, but the Bureau as well. What are they telling you with respect to the rest of the day? What is expected with the weather conditions?
Well, when it comes to what we can expect to see during the day, we'll see conditions gradually start to ease. The worst of it is probably over, but it is still windy. And while we've seen this kind of wind event overnight, it's going to transform into more of a storm event as we see the day progress, and it's definitely not over. There are still warnings in place. There's a coastal hazard warning along much of the coast, a watch and act for the southwest coast for a storm surge, advice level warning for the rest of the coast, and a severe weather warning for the central and southern parts of Victoria, including alpine areas. So the message is that if you are in heavily treed areas, as they called it during the press conference, to maybe make alternate plans, maybe go and stay with a relative or with friends, and of course to stay home if you don't need to be travelling.
Yeah, okay, Alex, thank you. We know it's not just Victoria that is undergoing this huge weather event. Tasmania is also suffering from the brunt of this weather system, and Langenberg is in New Norfolk on the River Derwent in Tasmania. Joins us now. Adam, can you take us through how things have developed overnight?
Hi, Catherine. Yeah, I'm here at the New Norfolk Bowls Club and Caravan Park, which is currently underwater at the moment. And if you look a little bit further behind me, you can see the River Derwent. It's moving pretty fast at the moment, and there's a fair bit of debris that's travelling through there, both from the floodwaters and the pretty challenging winds that have come through this area overnight. New Norfolk's currently in a monitor conditions spot. A couple of the schools here have been closed for the day. And there's 2 evacuation centres set up in the town, but the worst of the conditions are being felt further in the upper Derwent. There are evacuate now warnings that have been issued. The SES overnight said that they thought about half of the people who should have evacuated had, so there's definitely a message to get out to people, although those who are there now, they seem to be there for the time being. We heard on local radio this morning one woman who was undergoing dialysis and is without power and is trying to make her way to Hobart to receive that treatment. So there's some really trying and testing times for the local residents coming up. But in terms of what we're seeing at the moment, there have been some big showers and bursts of rain this morning, but as the Bureau said, that's sort of becoming less and less as we go forward. There is a fair bit of water left here though, so anything that adds to it, it really swells these already, pretty moving fast rivers.
If we can just talk about the power situation there in Tasmania, Adam, there's been significant damage to the network, the power network. How many people have been affected?
Yeah, the northwest and the west coast of Tasmania are copping the worst of the weather, and they're also copping the worst of the power outages, and in the north as well, sorry. There's about 2,000 different outages across the state at the moment. They're affecting about 37,000 customers, down from a peak of 53,000 overnight. So TasNetworks are getting on with restoring power where possible, but there's just so many outages and the winds continue to be pretty wild. So they're doing the best that they can, but they warn people they could be out without power for another day or so as they go forward. But we're going to hear an update from TasNetworks and all the emergency services about what we can expect in the next 24 hours. Here in New Norfolk, the worst is expected at about 8 p.m. when the tides rise. So just fingers crossed for this local area. We've got quite a few SES crews here readying the houses near where I'm standing for a flood event should those rivers rise even further. Catherine.
Okay, Adam Langenberg in New Norfolk outside of Hobart, and earlier Alexander Alvaro joining us from Melbourne. Thank you to you both for the updates. Well, emergency services in New South Wales are working to contain a bushfire which has closed the Princes Motorway north of Wollongong. The Watch and Act level fire is burning up an escarpment west of Thirroul after jumping the motorway. All southbound lanes of the M1 Princes Motorway are closed at Sublime Point, with southbound traffic being turned around at Sublime Point to travel north on the Princes Highway. A total fire ban has been declared in Sydney, Illawarra and Shoalhaven regions, with warm, strong winds driving up the fire danger. The New South Wales Rural Fire Service is advising people to avoid the area. To other news now, and a tiger has attacked its handler at the Dreamworld theme park in Queensland's Gold Coast, injuring her arm. Reporter Julia Andre is at Dreamworld and joins me now. Julia, what details do you have about this?
One of Dreamworld's tiger trainers has been taken to hospital this morning after an incident involving one of the park's tigers. Now, the woman sustained arm injuries and was treated by the Queensland Ambulance Service before being taken to the Gold Coast University Hospital in a stable condition at about 9 o'clock this morning. We've just received a statement from Dreamworld who say it's an isolated and rare incident which they'll be conducting a review into, but at this point in time their immediate focus is on their staff member. Now, Dreamworld has 9 Sumatran and Bengali tigers which make up its Tiger Island exhibit. That exhibit advertises itself as a way for customers to get mere centimetres away from the tigers. They've also got a feeding experience here at the park. It's a real selling point as you drive into the park. There's a billboard advertising that it's the only place to see tigers on the Gold Coast, and there's certainly still customers coming into the park this morning as well as on rides that I can see outside of the park, but it's a situation that we'll be following along with to see if anything else unfolds.
Okay, Julia Andre, many thanks for the update. The search is continuing for a teenage boy missing off the coast of a popular holiday town in South Australia. Reporter Sophie Holder has the latest details from Victor Harbour, south of Adelaide.
Search and rescue operation has resumed for a teenage boy swept off the coast here in Victor Harbour. SA police say that the 16-year-old boy from Blair Athol, which is in the Adelaide's northern suburbs, was swept from rocks about 3:15pm yesterday on Sunday afternoon here at Granite Island. The State Emergency Service and SAPOL are searching by foot, while Polair are using a helicopter to search by air, searching the waters around the area here. Marine safety vessels are also on standby. Victor Harbour here is a tourism town really that's around 80 kilometres south of Adelaide, and Granite Island is one of the more popular tourism destinations, separated from the mainland by a causeway. Now, this has all happened as we've seen some pretty significant weather here in South Australia and across southern parts of the country as well. It's been a lot of wind, also some rain. South Australia police say that this weather has hampered the search efforts so far as well. Speaking yesterday, the officer in charge of the Hills Fluorio Local Service Area Superintendent Joanne Howard, she thanked the local community and also the local rescue services for all their efforts so far.
Hundreds of thousands of Israelis have protested in the streets in an attempt to pressure the government to make a hostage deal in Gaza. The outpouring of public rage comes after 6 hostages were found murdered in Gaza at the weekend. Middle East correspondent Alison Horn has this report from Jerusalem.
All across the country, Israelis are taking to the streets in protests like these. You can feel there's this deep sense of rage and anger here at the Israeli government. This one here is outside the Prime Minister's office of Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. They're angry after the announcement that 6 hostages, the bodies of 6 hostages, were recovered from a tunnel in southern Gaza, and the military says they were alive up to a few days ago and killed by Hamas. Now, Hamas is claiming they were killed during Israeli airstrikes, but among the dead is Hirsch Goldberg Poland, an American Israeli who has really become the face of a worldwide hostage release campaign. And the anger here is about a lack of progress on securing a hostage release and ceasefire deal. Many citizens, including people here and the families of hostages, feel the Israeli government has abandoned
our government of murdering them, directly accuse our government of murdering these people. Of course, the finger on the trigger was Hamas, but the person behind these murders is our Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu.
These are citizens who were taken out of their homes, out of their beds, in their pajamas, or after the party, or from their base where they were sleeping as well because it was 6:29 in the morning, and it could have been any one of us. I live in Jerusalem, could happen in Jerusalem as well. So if the government couldn't protect us then, it should leave. The government should resign. They should all resign, and we should have elections, and someone should come who can protect us.
But Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu denies he is the obstruction to a deal being made.
Whoever murders hostages does not want a deal.
Here outside the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem, there's such a deep sense of anger and grief, but also a prevailing feeling that the government needs to make a hostage deal now, no matter the cost, to get the remaining captives out.
That was Alison Horn there, and our Global Affairs editor, John Lyons, joins me in the studio for more. John, hundreds of thousands of protests going on, as we saw there, across numerous cities, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, etc., demanding that Benjamin Netanyahu make a hostage deal. What sort of traction do you think they're getting?
Well, Kath, it's really starting to have effect. These are the largest demonstrations for a long time in Israel. The Histadrut, which is the equivalent of the ACTU, the head of the union movement, the major sort of labour group, has called basically for a nationwide strike tomorrow. They cover about 800,000 workers. So not necessarily all of those workers will walk off the job, but a lot will. It looks like Ben Gurion International Airport will be closed because a lot of their workers run and maintain. So if Israel's major international airport is closing, the streets, as you can see there, you can't move. This is before the strike, before the 800,000 workers from Histadrut. So this is by far the biggest challenge to Benjamin Netanyahu's leadership. And look, he has come back 3 times. This is his 3rd term as Prime Minister. He's the longest serving Prime Minister. He's an incredible survivor as a politician. I don't think he can survive this, though. I just think now, this has been building for 10, 11 months now. Started off with, say, 250 or so hostages. Many of them now, we know, have died. Tragically, the last 6 have come out. We just saw a picture there of young Hirsch Goldberg, Polin, 23 years of age, had his life in front of him. The tragedy, if you look at the faces of these latest 6 who've died, those sort of lost lives. So the emotions now in Israel are so strong that I can't see Benjamin Netanyahu surviving.
And so then what is the machinations for that, him not surviving?
Well, he has 64 votes at the moment out of 120. His major opposition leader, Yair Lapid, has just spoken to the Israeli public, referred to Netanyahu and the cabinet of death. His defense minister, Yoav Gallant, has publicly broken ranks with him now. The head of Shin Bet, Ronan Bar, has talked about the Jewish terror that is being enabled by Benjamin Netanyahu in the West Bank. So apart from that hardcore right wing keeping him in power, those 2 ministers we've talked about before, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, his support is crumbling.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the West Bank there, John. We know that the ongoing violence continues there. I mean, can you remind our viewers how different the West Bank is to Gaza? Because what some people might not think is that it's not run by Hamas like Gaza
That's
is.
right. There's 2 separate Palestinian territories. There's the West Bank, which has been controlled by the Palestinian Authority, or Fatah, the moderates of the Palestinians. Gaza has been controlled by Hamas, the militants, the hardliners, the terrorists. Now, what has happened is the Netanyahu government has enabled the money from Qatar to go into Gaza to support, according to former heads of Shin Bet, to support Hamas before October 7. So there was divide and conquer. Now, what's happening, I've written a piece on the website this morning, the ABC website, about this. The new front has opened up in the West Bank, where you have more than 620 Palestinians have been killed since October 7. The Israeli army are going into all sorts of places. For a long time, the Israeli army and their officials have been pouring concrete into Palestinian water wells, trying to force a lot of the Palestinians off the land. We can see now where they're going into towns. They argue security, right? And there is a security element to all of this. Of course, it's a very tough neighbourhood. But when you see them demolishing streets, when you see Israeli soldiers, as I have, shooting bullets into water tanks, I've stood there and watched them firing. What is the security element in shooting water? I've seen I know of Israeli soldiers who have pushed a rusted car into a Palestinian well in a little town village in the Hebron Hills called Susia, so that the water was poisoned and the Palestinians couldn't drink from it. Where is the security element of that is the question that the Israeli public needs to answer.
All while this is going on, we know that the polio vaccination rollout started over the weekend in Gaza. Do you know how that's going?
Look, it appears to be. There appear to be a lot of children being vaccinated. They've divided the area up, the Israelis, a third, north, central and southern Gaza. So they're pausing for, say, 8 or 9 hours while some children are being vaccinated in the area, the 1/3 where there's nothing happening. But the really bizarre thing about this, I've never seen a situation, any war before, where there's a pause for 9 hours, so the children are being vaccinated in 1/3, while children are being killed in the other 2/3 in bombing. I've never seen anything like this.
John, I don't think any of us have. Thank you very much for your analysis again today.
Thank you.
Well, dozens of people have been injured in a series of Russian airstrikes on the northeastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv. This man indicates he's fine moments after being freed from the rubble of an events hall struck by missiles. A shopping centre was also hit. 5 children are among the wounded. The latest attack has prompted Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky to renew calls on allies to allow Kyiv to fire Western-supplied weapons deeper into Russia to reduce Moscow's military threat on his country.
Russia has once again brutally attacked Kharkiv. As of now, almost 50 people have been injured. Everyone is receiving the necessary assistance. Rescuers continue to clear the rubble, and there are reports of people trapped beneath it. The targets were ordinary civilian structures, a shopping mall, a sports centre, and residential buildings.
Destroyed grain trucks lay next to the main highway on the 200-kilometre stretch from Kharkiv to Sumy after a convoy came under attack. 1 driver was killed and 4 others injured.
There was one hit from the sky. We hid under a trailer. Everyone was scared. It seemed to be quiet. After 2 to 3 minutes, the next one hit, and the car caught fire. We rushed to put it out. It was impossible. There are no words, no words.
Over the border in Russia, smoke billows from a fire at a power station after Ukraine launched a wave of drones targeting Russian energy plants and a refinery near Moscow. The Kremlin says it destroyed more than 150 drones fired by Kyiv in one of the biggest attacks of the war. Authorities in Russia's southern Belgorod district say 1 person has been killed and almost a dozen more injured by Ukrainian shelling. Kyiv launched its surprise incursion in the neighbouring Kursk region last month and now occupies dozens of settlements, but its progress appears to have slowed. More than 130,000 people have been evacuated from Russian border zones.
We thought that it was literally for one evening, that we would return home that day. So we left, only with documents. We did not take anything with us at all. We left without things. Then it turned out that we will not return home anytime soon.
Elsewhere, near the front line of the conflict in the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhzhia, there's some joy as children celebrate the traditional first day of school with a parade. Large gatherings are banned in the city, so only students in their first and final years were allowed to take part. With war on their doorstep, students study a week in person and the other online because the school's bomb shelter can only accommodate 250 people.
Because of the Russian aggression, children needed to study at their homes. When they tried to go to school last year, they were taught in the bunker. It is still an incomplete education. We are positive looking into the future. We are still happy that the children have the chance to go to the celebration today, the same as it was in the pre-war times. This is really exciting and joyful.
Let's take a quick look at the national weather details now. It's sunny in Brisbane, very windy in sunny in Sydney, windy and partly cloudy in Canberra, windy with a shower or two in Melbourne and Hobart, wind easing and partly cloudy in Adelaide. Perth, it'll be sunny and a sunny day in Darwin with the top of 35. This is ABC News. Our top stories this hour. A woman has been killed after a tree crushed the cabin she was in on Victoria, New South Wales border. Emergency services were called to a holiday park where they found the body of a 63-year-old woman. Severe weather lashed the region at the weekend, but windy conditions are expected to ease this evening. A clean-up effort is underway while tens of thousands remain without power. In Tasmania, emergency warnings are in place for communities in the Derwent Valley where flooding is affecting a growing area. Communities along the Forth River in the northwest should prepare to leave. 2 evacuation centres have been set up at New Norfolk and Memorial Hall. More than 38,000 properties still have no power. Israel is expected to come to a standstill today as workers stage a nationwide strike to put pressure on the government to reach a ceasefire deal with Hamas. The country has seen its largest protests in months, triggered by the recovery of bodies of 6 hostages from Gaza. At the same time, the pauses in fighting to allow children to be vaccinated against polio seem to be holding. And Australia has enjoyed its most successful day of the Paris Paralympics, winning 10 medals. Nikki Ayres and Jed Olschwanger won Australia's first gold in para rowing in the PR3 mixed sculls final. Attention now turns to the triathlon, which will go ahead after a water quality test. Well, Launceston in Tasmania's north has been hit hard by wild winds and rain, with the community now facing a major clean-up. The city experienced widespread fallen trees and power lines overnight, with wind gusts of up to 130 kilometres per hour. Shane Eberhard, the City of Launceston's General Manager of Infrastructure and Assets, joins me now. Shane, thank you very much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome.
What sort of damage to assets and infrastructure has been experienced where you are?
Oh, look, so we've been lucky. We haven't observed any major damaged infrastructure, but we do have in our municipality around 3,500 people still without power, and some of them have been without power for a couple of days now and will perhaps remain without power for coming days. That's mostly been a result of trees falling over power lines, so we've got lots of road closures, lots of traffic signals that are out causing a lot of congestion. And we're also dealing with flooding of the North Esk. And also we're a bit unique in Launceston that we actually, over many years, we've invested in a flood levy system that around 6,000 people live behind. But that system relies on pumps to remove water from one side, the dry side, to the wet side into the river. And at the moment, some of those pumps don't have any power, so we're working on a short-term fix.
Right, okay.
On the basis that power's not going to return.
So you need that power to pump the water in the inundated areas over to the dry side. Shane, I believe you are the emergency measures coordinator. Just how challenging is that for you at the moment?
Oh, look, it is a challenge. We've got all our crews, around 100 staff out at the moment on many jobs. So this is just another one. So we're looking at mobile pumps to be able to move the water from one side to the other. Of course, the mobile pumps can't do anywhere near the capacity of the permanent powered pumps.
And mobile pumps, I presume they're manually operated?
Yeah, look, we've got a few pumps that on trailers, but in terms of scale, they might pump, say, 100 litres a second, whereas the permanent pump stations that run on 3-phase power are pumping probably in excess of 1,000 litres a second.
Okay. Given that there's so many of your residents there still without power, where are they going to, say, seek refuge or even just have a hot shower or charge a phone?
Yeah, so we've got made available our Launceston Aquatic Centre, so people are welcome to go and have a shower. We've set up a room with lots of power points and cords so they can go and charge their devices. And then this afternoon from 1 to 4, we're also opening up Lilydale Community Hall for people to come and charge their devices. There's a commercial kitchen there if they need. Unfortunately, no showers. But hopefully that will be welcomed by some of those in our rural community.
So, Shane, how long are you expecting this recovery effort to take and the clean-up effort to take?
Yeah, so we've had 2 fronts cross, one Saturday night, one Sunday night, so we've been operating 24 hours a day the last few days. We're expecting that to stop today, but it's likely to be weeks, if not at least a month, to clean up the mess that's been created. At the moment, we're just clearing trees off the road and leaving them, making sure it's safe for the public, but many weeks of clean-up to occur.
And no doubt Tas Network crews are really working hard to restore the power there. What's the latest on Launceston Airport?
I don't have an update on Launceston Airport. I understand the most recent one I heard was that this morning was that everything was running fine.
Okay, well, that's some good news there. We wish you all the very best with the clean-up effort, and thank you for that information where people can go if they need some refuge right now. Shane Eberhardt, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, the New South Wales Government will introduce new offences, court orders and other changes to close gaps in the state's domestic, family and sexual violence legislation. Repeat abusers will face additional prison time, while other serious offenders will be required to inform police of any online dating profiles they create. The Minns government will also introduce a new serious domestic abuse prevention order, which could stay in force for a maximum duration of 5 years. Breaches of the order will be considered a criminal offence and carry a maximum penalty of 5 years in jail or a $33,000 fine. The government proposes broadening the definition of stalking in the Crimes Act to include a specific reference to GPS trackers. And in an attempt to prevent perpetrators finding children's names or addresses, proposed changes would allow sole parents to change their child's name if they have a family court order to that effect. Premier Chris Minns says law changes are crucial to keep people safe.
It's clear that we need to pull every lever possible to keep people safe. As I said earlier, we're very concerned with the prevalence and rate of domestic violence in our community. We need to do everything we possibly can to reduce the incidence of domestic violence, and part of that will be prevention programs like the one run by the Mariners here on the Central Coast, but it will also mean law changes so that those that commit acts of family and domestic violence in the community are held accountable for their violent, atrocious behaviour, and also that we bring in laws to keep people safe in the event that their partner, their intimate partner, is charged with serious domestic violence offences in the community.
The New South Wales Premier Chris Minns speaking earlier today. Well, the Treasurer has pointed the finger at successive interest rate rises for a stagnating economy. The government is anticipating weak economic growth when figures are released this week. Here's political reporter Evelyn Manfield in our Parliament House Bureau in Canberra.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers is getting ahead of these new national accounts figures that will be released on Wednesday. They're set to show if and by how much the economy is growing. Now, the figures from the March quarter, so the first 3 months of the year, showed that the economy barely grew at just 0.1%. And Jim Chalmers, in this statement ahead of those figures Wednesday, says that he wouldn't be surprised if, quote, the growth is soft and subdued. He's pointing the figure at both global uncertainty and interest rate rises, which he says are smashing the economy. Strong language there from the Treasurer. Of course, we've had those 13 rate rises since May 2022. And we did hear from Assistant Minister in the Federal Government, Matt Thistlethwaite, this morning, speaking on Sky News. He says that, of course, interest rates are a decision for the RBA, so that's a matter for them, but that the government wants the RBA to take into account account that the impact that interest rate rises are already having on Australian households and small businesses. So the government doesn't want the RBA to go too far. In response, we've heard from the Coalition. They've taken these comments as an extraordinary attack on the independent RBA and says that the RBA is just making decisions in relation to things like government spending. So these new national accounts figures due Wednesday will be one to watch.
Nadia Daly is here now with today's business news. And Nadia, some developments from the company that runs Star.
Yeah, that's right. So Star Entertainment Group has been suspended from trade by the ASX today for not lodging its annual financial results in time. Now, that annual report was due to be released on Friday, but Star placed itself into a voluntary trading halt that day after a second inquiry found that the casino was still unfit to hold a licence. The casino operator has seen its share price halve in the past year following heavy scrutiny from the New South Wales Independent Casino Commission.
Okay, a lot more to play out there as it has moved quite quickly over the last couple of days. Just on to house prices, there's some new data out today. What's it telling us?
Yeah, so the data from CoreLogic shows that despite higher interest rates, dwelling prices are continuing to rise. The rate of growth, though, appears to be slowing, and there is some good news for renters. So the data shows prices rose the most in Perth, followed by Adelaide and Brisbane. Prices fell in Canberra, Melbourne and Darwin, and interestingly, Adelaide's median house price is now higher than Melbourne's. Now, rent growth has slowed in the past month, in good news for renters. The reasons are unclear, but it might be partially due to a drop in migration. There was also a slight increase in household size, meaning share housing and multi-generational housing might be on the rise. Let's take a look at the markets, and the Australian share market has started the week lower despite an upbeat end to last week on Wall Street. The All Ordinaries and the ASX 200 are both down about 1/3%. Losses on the ASX 200 are being led by gold miners today. Heading across to Asia, where markets are mostly down across the region. Japan's share market is up, though, about 0.5%. In the US, markets ended their trading week higher. The S&P 500 finished up 1% on Friday. The Dow Jones is up 0.6%. The Aussie dollar is currently buying 67.56 US cents, and that's finance.
Well, thousands of Israeli protesters have taken to the streets demanding their Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, reach a ceasefire deal with Hamas to bring the remaining hostages home. It comes after the Israeli army recovered the bodies of 6 hostages held by Hamas in southern Gaza. The head of Israel's main labour union has called for a general to put pressure on the government to agree to a deal. Former Israeli diplomat Alon Pincus is in Tel Aviv and has been at the protests. He says it's difficult to determine how Benjamin Netanyahu will react, if at all, to the mounting pressure.
Like his entire approach, he's been arrogant and conceited and conceited and aloof and indifferent and completely impervious, seemingly impervious to all of it. That doesn't mean he is not frightened. That doesn't mean he is not rattled. That doesn't mean he is not riled by what's going on. And that most importantly, it doesn't mean that he is not apprehensive of the political implications, because the defense minister is going full steam against him on the hostage deal, but conceivably also on the political side. Not to mention the possibility that what you saw in Israel today and what you will see tomorrow could have an effect on how the Americans pressure him. And so the combination or the confluence of all these pressures spell a very unpleasant period. He may think he may survive this because the public is too jaded, too dejected, too depleted in terms of energy, but he may be proven wrong.
Former Israeli diplomat Elon Pincus there. Well, humanitarian agencies in Gaza say the mass polio vaccination campaign in Gaza has gotten off to a positive start. The campaign aims to vaccinate about 640,000 children in central Gaza by Wednesday before moving on to northern and southern regions. The campaign was organised after a baby was partially paralysed last month by the virus, the first such case in the territory in 25 years. The UNRWA hopes the localised pauses in fighting will hold so all children under 10 can be vaccinated.
So far, everything's going to plan. The children are arriving, the families are here, the vaccinations are going well. We have the vaccinations in individual cool boxes to sustain the heat of the day. It seems calm and quiet in the Gaza Strip so far. The humanitarian pause is so far lasting, which is what we need to implement this vaccine campaign, and we will see how things go over the coming days.
Germany's far right has won a state election in the country's east for the first time since World War II. The anti-immigration party, Alternative for Germany, celebrated its success in the eastern state of Tunisia, where it is set to win almost a third of the vote. It came a close second to mainstream conservatives in the more populous state of Saxony. The ADF has little hope of forming government as opposing parties refuse to work with the far right, but the results reflect the rise of anti-establishment parties across Europe. The asylum issue was reignited last month when 3 people were killed in Western Germany by a Syrian man who was allegedly motivated by the Islamic State group. Pope Francis will embark on a 12-day Asia-Pacific tour visiting Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, East Timor and Singapore. The trip, which was originally planned for 2020 but was scuppered by the COVID pandemic, is said to be a nod to the importance of Asia to the Christian faith. The 87-year-old pontiff will headline more than 40 events expected to highlight environmental threats and promote interfaith dialogue. The trip will be the longest journey yet undertaken by the Pope. Well, tonight on Four Corners, a compelling documentary shedding light on the rising tensions in the South China Sea. It examines the broader implications, including deepening ties between the Philippines and Australia, highlighted by a landmark defence deal.
In March 2024, Australia was among several countries to register concerns about China's actions. Australian government statements about the South China Sea are nothing new, but analysts say this one was unusually explicit in attributing responsibility to China. When President Marcos visited Canberra, the Australian government gave him the platform to address Parliament.
For both of us, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea is not an abstract notion or a theoretical question. Freedom of navigation is fundamental to our sovereignty, our prosperity, our security, and our territorial integrity. Our cooperation is an assertion of our national interest and a recognition of our regional responsibility. It reflects our shared understanding that peace depends on more than the presence of the great powers. All of us in the international community, middle powers like our two nations, as well as smaller nations, have our part to play in building a more stable, peaceful and prosperous future.
The challenges that we face may be formidable, but equally formidable is our resolve. We will not yield.
And I commend you for your personal resolve, Mr. President, for you and your country's courage in calling out acts of coercion, and the Philippines' steadfast commitment to international law.
They announced the enhanced defence program to provide more maritime cooperation between the two countries.
And you can see that story tonight on Four Corners on ABC TV and then anytime on ABC iView. Well, there's been more success overnight for Australia at the Paralympics with medals in para-swimming and para-rowing. ABC national sport reporter David Mark and reporter Charles Bryce have been watching all the action in Paris.
We're at the end of another day of competition here in Paris, and it's been yet another successful day for the Australians. But David, it hasn't been without some controversy.
There's been so much, Charles. Probably the biggest one was Ahmed Kelly, who swims in the 150-metre medley, the SM3 class. He was disqualified in qualification this morning because basically a fundamental error by one of the officials who said that he wasn't swimming the required stroke in one of his strokes. Now, the stroke in question, I believe, was the freestyle. You're allowed to do whatever you want. It's called freestyle because you're free to choose your style. You can do whatever you want, which is what Ahmed was doing. But the official said, no, that's not the correct freestyle. There is no correct freestyle.
Well, I had a chat with him after his race in the final, and he said that he was deemed to be swimming butterfly, which is one of the strokes you're not allowed to swim in the freestyle. So speaking with him after his race in the final, he said that appeals process which he went through was overturned in his favour, claiming second in the finals. He said that the distraction of the appeals process, it didn't hinder his finals race. He was still able to swim a magnificent race and come second.
Yeah, and to put all that out of his mind after, having to go through that process and come second, he was leading until about 15, 20 metres to go, but then he was run down by a German racer. But his great mate, Grant Patterson, came in third, which was where they came in Tokyo. So Ahmed got second in Tokyo, Patterson third. So they doubled up, so that's pretty cool. So that was one of the silver and bronzes in the pool, and we had another one with Rowan Carruthers and Tom Gallagher. I think Rowan was probably slightly upset. He's the world champion, and I think immediately after the race he was kind of looking at all the things that where he could have, made up those few fractions of a second, but it was a very close race. And Tom Gallagher getting third, of course, after he won gold in the 50-metre free, so a really good meet for him.
Rowan Carruthers, he had a bit of swagger going out onto the pool deck. He was wearing his Akuba that all the athletes were given as part of their uniform. So that was a success in the pool. Looking at the para rowing, there was also success, also controversy.
There was indeed. So we should start with the success, of course. So Nikki Ayres and Jed Walchfigger in the PR3, the mixed doubles. It's the first time that this event has ever been at a Paralympic Games. They won the gold medal, so they get the first gold medal in this particular event. And it's actually the first time Australia's won a gold medal in rowing at the Paralympics, which I find really amazing. It's been around since 2008, and Australia's got such a rich history in rowing. You'd think we would have won a gold medal at some point, but no, this is the first.
I was really surprised by that as well. We could only manage one gold on the water, but we scored a bronze in a pretty unique way.
So Eric Horry in his event crossed the line in fourth spot behind an Italian rower who, as it turned out, had a mobile phone in his boat. You're not allowed to have mobile phones in the boat. No communication devices. He did. The officials found out. And so Eric, thinking, okay, I've just missed out, actually got a bronze medal. Pretty cool.
The Steelers, the wheelchair rugby team, up against Japan. In the semi-final, they needed to win to go into the gold medal match. They couldn't quite get over the line. They were looking good for the most of the match, really.
Well, we were both there, and they had a 2-try lead in the final quarter. And I guess the question has to be asked, did they blow it? Because they had the game under their control, but they made 2 errors, really, and that cost them the game. The first error was in the last minute of regulation time. They needed to score a try. They were sort of holding onto the ball and trying to run down the clock, and in the end, they lost possession.
Now for more sport, I'm joined in the studio by Daniela Intilli. And Danny, you'll have to excuse me if I'm a little preoccupied down here because I've got the US Open live scores up because Alexei Popyrin is on the court right now and it's a great match.
Tell me, I was out there watching. I have to actually come in here and talk, but that's okay.
I'm watching for work purposes, by the way.
It's such an important match, isn't it?
Yes.
For a place in the US Open finals, Alexei Popyrin coming off that incredible upset against Novak Djokovic at the second seed. But this has been a tougher challenge against American Francis Tiafoe, the 20th seeded American. He took the first 2 sets, 6-4, 7-6. Popyrin did fight back to claim the third. It's a tight 4th fourth set. Tiafoe was leading, but Tiafoe still leading 5-3, but Alexei Popyrin catching up. So we'll see whether this goes to a fifth set or whether Tiafoe does wrap it up. And meanwhile, in the women's draw, the defending champion Coco Gauff, she is out. She went down to the American 13th seed Emma Navarro in 3 sets in the round of 13. So Coco Gauff, she was ranked third. She struggled on her serve and went down 6-3, 4-6, 6-3. Navarro will take on the Spaniard Paula Badozo in the quarterfinals after she beat China's Wang Yafan 6-1, 6-2. And I did forget to mention just with the Popyrin match that the winner will play Grigor Dimitrov.
Okay, which will be another fantastic matchup.
Absolutely,
as well.
yeah.
On to the Grand Prix. Australian Oscar Piastri has finished second in Italy.
It was a case of probably what could have been for Oscar Piastri. Himself and Lando Norris, his teammate, they actually had started on pole. So Norris was on pole, Piastri was on second. Piastri then was actually leading for quite a while, but Ferrari opted for this bold one-stop pit strategy, and that enabled them to claim victory on their home track. So that was Charles Leclerc clinching the victory ahead of Australia's Oscar Piastri, while McLaren, they opted to pit twice, and that pretty much cost them the checkered flag. Lando Norris, he finished third, so that gives him 62 points behind championship leader Max Verstappen, who's now sixth. So there's 8 races remaining. Let's hear from a disappointed Oscar Piastri.
Yeah, it hurts. I'm not gonna lie, it hurts a lot. Did a lot of things right today. There was a lot of question marks on the strategy going into the race. From the position we were in, with the tyres looking like they did, doing a one-stop seemed like a very risky call, and in the end it was right.
And Danny, who won Golf's Tour Championship?
The world number one, Scotty Scheffler, he has just had a remarkable year. So he won the Tour Championship in Atlanta by 4 strokes over fellow American Colin Morikawa. So this tournament, it's the final of the FedEx Cup, which takes into account the previous scores. Scheffler, he started the final round with a 5-shot buffer, fired a 67 to win at 30 under. So that is a $36.9 million winner's check. It is an extraordinary amount of money. He's the first, that's all. He's the first player since Tiger Woods in 2007 to win 7 events in a PGA Tour season. Australia's Adam Scott, the only Aussie in the field, finished in a tie for 4th.
We chose the wrong career, Danny, that's for sure. Thank you. To some breaking news now, and a former Queensland childcare worker has pleaded guilty to raping, sexually abusing and exploiting dozens of prepubescent girls under his care. Ashley Paul Griffith was arraigned on more than 300 charges in the District Court in Brisbane today. The then 45-year-old from the Gold Coast was arrested in August 2022 by federal police and charged with multiple Commonwealth child exploitation material offences. We'll bring you more on this developing story throughout the afternoon. And a brief update on the fire situation in New South Wales. The M4 motorway is closed, burning close to the road. The fire is currently at advice level and is burning to the north of the M4 between Carlisle Avenue and Roper Road near Minchinbury. The RFS is urging drivers to avoid the area. And meanwhile, firefighters say they have contained a bushfire at Madden's Plains north of Wollongong thanks to the efforts of ground crew and water bombing helicopter. The fire prompted the temporary closure of the M1 southbound, which has now reopened with a speed limit of 40 kilometres per hour in place. Now, this all comes as a total fire ban has been declared in Sydney, Illawarra and Shoalhaven regions today, with warm, strong winds driving up the fire danger warnings. And that is ABC News for now. I'm Catherine Robinson. Thanks for your company. We are expecting an update from Tasmanian Emergency Services in a few moments, and you can watch that on the ABC News channel.
Tonight, a woman killed in the state's south as strong winds bring down branches, cut power and fan bushfires. Hello, I'm Lydia Feng. This is ABC News. sea of protests in Tel Aviv, but Benjamin Netanyahu ignores the calls for a ceasefire. Proposed changes to strengthen domestic violence laws and better protect victim survivors. And Australia's most successful day at the Paralympics in Paris. A woman has been killed in the state's south as wild weather lashes the southeast corner of the country. Cyclonic winds, storm surges and floods have battered parts of Tasmania and Victoria, and wind gusts over 100 kilometres an hour have hit the Illawarra in Sydney's southwest. At Minchinbury in the city's west, a blaze impacted the rear of the storage unit facility, with 20 firefighters working to contain it. The gusty weather whipped up a fast-moving grass fire near Blacktown, closing off the M4 and damaging power lines. In Wollongong, a blaze threatened the Princes Highway before being brought under control by water bombers. One woman was taken to hospital in Camden after being hit by a falling tree, while a fire in Tomago near Newcastle came dangerously close to a power plant. More than 45,000 homes in New South Wales are still without power, with many more affected south of the border.
Howling winds.
Looks like an actual hurricane out there at the moment.
Sent seas flying. Wow. And trees crashing, leaving a trail of destruction across Victoria. A woman died and her husband was injured when a branch fell at this caravan park in Moama on the New South Wales border.
Upon arrival, emergency services found the cabin severely damaged and unfortunately located a deceased 63-year-old female inside that cabin.
180,000 people were hit with power outages in the state, and the SES received more than 4,000 calls for help.
About 12:30, there was a really loud bang, and half the shed roof came off, and then about an hour later, the rest of the shed and the tree came down.
There were similar scenes across Bass Strait. This family from Tasmania's north had a lucky escape.
I was peacefully playing Fortnite in the lounge room, right where that window is near the front door, and I heard a big, almost like the house shook.
Another 47,000 homes lost power in the Apple Isle, and 2 road crew workers were injured.
I understand some of their injuries are quite severe, though non-life-threatening.
A series of cold fronts moving across the country's southeast are responsible for the recent run of wild weather, with wind gusts of up to 157 kilometres an hour recorded at King Island overnight. Further south, the River Derwent is swollen and a major dam at Meadowbank is spilling over. This distillery has been inundated, as has this bowls club.
Worried about what's happening right now, but also worried about what the fallout's going to be as well. Lots of cleaning up.
For many locals, this is the highest they've ever seen the river, and they're still on standby.
It's moving real fast, and there's more coming, they say.
The winds at least should ease this evening as this system moves offshore, but there may be more bad weather later this week. Natalie Whiting, ABC News.
A major operation is underway to rescue a ship in trouble off the state's south coast. Navy frigate HMAS Arunta and several aircraft were deployed at around 1 p.m. after the Spirit of Mateship sent out a distress signal. 2 people are on board the 19-metre yacht, which is 150 kilometres offshore from Nowra. It's believed to be taking on water due to a mechanical issue. The rescue mission is expected to reach the Spirit of Mateship at around midnight. The Treasurer has taken aim at the Reserve Bank, accusing it of smashing the economy because of successive interest rate hikes. Economists argue the government's trying to manage expectations as it braces for figures expected to show the economy is barely growing. Here's political reporter Stephanie Dalzell.
Full court press in the West.
The Prime Minister and his federal cabinet are in town.
Good morning, great to be here.
High vis and high energy.
Nothing makes me happier than coming to see 12 amazing affordable houses
failing to disguise nervousness about a sluggish economy.
I think the Australian people, frankly, expect me to tell it like it is. And I've been making that point for some months. What I said overnight wasn't new.
His statement overnight making multiple mentions of the Reserve Bank's 13 interest rate hikes, saying the impact of interest rate rises are smashing the economy.
I think the government has found this blame the RBA rhetoric quite successful in the past. And I think this shows that they're going to be running this sort of line right through to the election.
The Treasurer out today blaming the Reserve Bank for his failings.
But what appeared to be a criticism the RBA had gone too far, today softened.
Global economic uncertainty and higher interest rates are smashing household budgets and slowing our economy.
Bracing for the latest national accounts figures, tipped to show annual growth will be under 1%, which would be the slowest growth since 1991, outside of figures seen during the pandemic.
These figures are likely to come in weak. We're not talking about a recession, but it certainly feels like a recession.
Many Australians are doing it tough. We have an economy that is growing, but that growth is very modest.
The Albanese government's fate at the next election is inextricably linked to the economy and the lived experience of it by millions of people hit by inflation and higher interest rates. Talk of hammer blows and smashing things hint at mounting frustrations. The Treasurer's powers are limited when the Reserve Bank is operating with determination and fierce independence in its fight against inflation. Stephanie Dalzell, ABC News, Canberra.
Hundreds of thousands of Israeli workers will be striking tonight, causing mass disruption across the country in a nationwide attempt to pressure their government to make a hostage deal in Gaza. The outpouring of public rage was sparked after 6 hostages were found dead in Gaza, with new details showing they were shot multiple times at close range.
A sea of outrage on the streets across Israel, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Hundreds of thousands unified in anger and despair and threatening to bring the country to a standstill. They accuse the Israeli government of abandoning 6 hostages who were alive just days ago. Now back in Israel in body bags, families are overcome with grief. Protesters claim the Prime Minister has repeatedly torpedoed attempts to reach a ceasefire and hostage release deal, a claim he's denied.
We accuse our government of murdering them, directly accuse our government of murdering these people. Of course, the finger on the trigger was Hamas, but the person behind these murders is our Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu.
The government should resign. They should all resign, and we should have elections, and someone should come who can protect us.
Here outside the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem, there's such a deep sense of anger and grief, but also a prevailing feeling that the government needs to make a hostage deal now, no matter the cost, to get the remaining captives out.
Trying to force the government to act, Israel's biggest workforce union has called for a shutdown of Israel's economy today. 800,000 workers, nearly a quarter of Israel's workforce, have started to strike, closing ports, municipalities, public transport, even Israel's main airport. Their demand: bring Israel's hostages home. Alison Horn, ABC News, Jerusalem.
It's not the first time grief and fury has spilled into Israeli streets, but the massive action planned in the coming hours could force the country's leader to act. Here's Global Affairs editor John Lyons.
Israel now faces the real prospect that it will be ground to a halt by the sheer scale of these protests, some of the largest in the country's history. Israel's 800,000 workers from the largest union organisation have been called upon to join the hundreds of thousands of demonstrators already in the streets calling for a ceasefire in the war in Gaza, accusing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of neglecting Israeli hostages while prioritising the war with Hamas. The IDF believes that at least a third of the 101 hostages still inside Gaza have died. Netanyahu is increasingly isolated. wounded, even as he doubles down on military operations inside Gaza and is opening a new front in the occupied West Bank. Israel is now a country crippled by public anger. Even its international airport will be shut down by strike action. The big question now is how Netanyahu will respond to this unprecedented political pressure.
John Lyons with that analysis. Nearly 50 people have been wounded after another Russian rocket attack on the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv. It's the second major offensive there in the past 3 days. Europe correspondent Catherine Diss reports from the central city of Dnipro.
More horror in a city that's seen too much of it. Russian ballistic missiles slam into Kharkiv. The city's largest sporting centre destroyed. Ukraine's Olympics Committee says 4 rockets hit the complex. Pulled from the wreckage in a pair of gym shorts. I'm okay, this staff member tells rescuers. In a nearby park, the injured sit dazed on benches. Others flee underground to the metro as the missiles keep falling.
When we got here, there were more explosions. People were screaming. There were people injured and bloody.
Prosecutors say another rocket fell here outside a massive supermarket in Saltivka. More than 30 people were wounded here in a working-class neighbourhood that has been targeted over and over again.
We believe that this was an act of terrorism, of barbarism, nothing more, nothing less.
Scenes of destruction also in the Russian city of Belgorod. The governor accusing Ukraine of striking civilian targets in Kharkiv's former sister city. Nearly a dozen were wounded here, including children.
He asked, "Granddad, am I going to live or not?" I said, you will. It'll be here soon." And the ambulance soon pulled up.
Life is getting harder and harder for the people of Kharkiv and Belgorod, with ever more frequent tit-for-tat attacks. The situation there is reflecting a broader war that seems to be escalating. For a second week in a row, Russian missiles target Kyiv. 2.5 years since the invasion, it's still Russia that has superior firepower, but its advantage seems to be diminishing. Catherine Diss, ABC News, Dnipro.
The state government has proposed more reforms to crack down on domestic violence offenders. They include longer prison terms and expanding the definition of stalking. Santhi Gregory has the details.
The Minns government vowed to learn from the death of 28-year-old Molly Ticehurst, who was allegedly murdered by her former partner in April this year. It has since announced a $230 million emergency package to combat DV and has introduced new bail laws for serious offenders. Today, it has laid out more reforms. The definition of stalking will be modernised to cover technology-facilitated tracking, such as using a GPS or monitoring someone online that's increasingly being weaponised by domestic abusers. Penalties for repeated and serious breaches of apprehended domestic violence orders will be strengthened. The current punishment for breaching an ADVO carries a maximum of 2 years in prison and a $5,500 fine. The new offence will result in up to 3 years imprisonment and an $11,000 fine. There'll also be a new offence for repeated breaches, punishable for up to 5 years in prison. A court could also order the abuser to inform police of any dating profiles they have, and it would be easier and safer to change a child's name without involving the perpetrator.
We're very concerned with the prevalence and rate of domestic violence in our community. We need to do everything we possibly can to reduce the incidence of domestic violence.
We think this is an important start, but we've got to move forward on other things. We've got to make sure that women can get to safety. We've got to make sure that our frontline services are well equipped to support women and children when they reach out for help.
The changes will be introduced to Parliament later this month.
A by-election in the state seat of Pittwater has been confirmed for October 19th, following the resignation of Liberal MP Rory Amon. The 35-year-old quit last week after being charged with child sex offences, which he denies. Premier Chris Minns says he heard previously rumours about a potential investigation into Rory Amon, but wasn't aware of any specifics.
Rumours about politicians are reasonably common, and particularly from media sources, often they don't amount to any particular inquiry. I don't think it would have been appropriate for us to be looped in. We trust the police to do their job.
Coming up on 7:30, should tech companies be held responsible for criminal content on their apps?
It's been used when people illegally are buying drugs, grass, marijuana, or some other dark things.
We care about freedom. Even our logo symbolizes freedom.
Elon Musk is free, Mark Zuckerberg is free, but Pavel Durov is now in prison. Why? Because he's Russian.
The defamation trial brought by Senator Linda Reynolds against Brittany Higgins over a series of social media posts has entered its final days. In a blistering final submission, Ms. Higgins' lawyer described the senator as an unreliable witness whose testimony was gratuitous and self-serving, while also reminding the court of the heavy burden her client was carrying as a victim of crime.
Throughout this lengthy trial, Brittany Higgins' lawyer has given little away.
So I'm not going to comment. Ms. Young, can you say when Brittany Higgins will appear here in Perth?
Rachel Young SC reserving her powder for her closing address in the fifth and final week. The trials heard competing versions of events about what happened in the aftermath of Miss Higgins' allegation she was raped inside Parliament House in 2019. In a scathing address, Miss Higgins' lawyer questioned the reliability of Senator Reynolds' evidence, describing it as gratuitous and self-serving at times, suggesting Senator Reynolds did not always believe Miss Higgins had been raped. She told the court Miss Higgins only went public with her ordeal for altruistic reasons, motivated to make a profound and lasting impact on the way in which gendered violence and safety issues are addressed in Australian workplaces. She also questioned Senator Reynolds' decision to leak confidential documents about a $2.4 million Commonwealth settlement paid to Miss Higgins, saying it didn't reflect well on the senator that she took that step 10 days after a decision was taken not to proceed with a second criminal trial against Miss Higgins' alleged rapist due to concerns over her mental health. Senator Reynolds claims Miss Higgins and her now husband David Shiraz weaponised her rape allegation in 2021 media interviews to attack her and the Liberal government. But Ms Young has questioned the senator's dogged focus on this alleged politicisation. She says it has no relevance to the actual posts made by Ms Higgins in 2023 that she's being sued for. Senator Reynolds' lawyer will begin his summation tomorrow, with a decision unlikely for a number of months. Rebecca Trigger, ABC News.
An animal handler is recovering in hospital after being attacked by a tiger at Dreamworld. Paramedics were called to the Gold Coast theme park this morning after the 47-year-old woman was bitten on the arm. She's one of the park's most experienced tiger handlers. Dreamworld said the incident was rare and it would be conducting a review.
So the patient obviously had received some serious lacerations and puncture wounds from the animal. She was quite pale and feeling unwell.
It's been 20 years since the copper smelter at Port Kembla in the Illawarra closed down, and now the site is finally up for sale. Its owner has promised to remediate the land and some nearby private properties, but some locals say the clean-up plan doesn't go far enough.
Bridget Pickett is a hobby gardener without a vegetable patch. She says it's too risky because her Port Kembla home is among 300 residential properties found to be carrying toxic dusts in their roof cavities and yards.
I was told that there was lead in the back. There was no lead in the front yard, and there was lead on the windowsills in 2 of the bedrooms.
Harmful particles like cadmium, zinc, lead and arsenic were emitted from the Port Kembla copper smelter, made famous by its 198-metre stack, which was demolished 10 years ago.
We knew there would be probably some rollover effect from that industry at the house.
Earlier this month, Bridget had the dust at her home tested and professionally cleaned up, something Greg Rogers had done 2 years ago.
The remediation was completed in 1 day. Look, I think the result was really good.
Port Kembla Copper owns the former smelter site. It's covered the cost of testing and remediation for 4 years, but only 7 homes have been cleaned up so far. The site is now on the market, and the company has promised to ramp up its remediation program for homes south and west of the demolished stack.
I think it's a great thing for a corporation to actually do this voluntarily, because there's so many of those houses will have that lead dust slowly seeping in from the ceiling cavity, and then the people inside are being exposed to that lead dust.
Some don't believe the remediation boundary stretches far enough, but the company says there is no evidence to suggest concentrations of metal found outside the investigation area need further assessment. The Port Kembla site will remain zoned for commercial and industrial use. Brooke Chandler, ABC News, Port Kembla.
To finance now, and houses in Adelaide and Perth are now more expensive than in Melbourne. Here's Alan Kohler.
This is a big moment. Adelaide and Perth are more expensive than Melbourne. In fact, Melbourne is now 6th on the median price league table, or 3rd from the bottom. The national median house price rose 0.5% in August to just over $800,000. But that's meaningless. There's no such thing as a national housing market anymore. Prices in Adelaide, Perth and Brisbane are galloping along at 1 to 2% a month, while in Melbourne, Canberra, Hobart and Darwin they're falling, and Sydney's flat. Now, part of the difference is that Melbourne and Sydney are getting denser, that is, more high-rise apartments are increasing supply. In the past 15 years, the proportion of multi-unit dwellings in Melbourne has gone from 23 to 33%, and in Sydney from 31 to 39%. In Adelaide and Perth, it stayed fairly flat at around 16%. New listings in Perth and Adelaide have collapsed, while in Melbourne, they're up 10%. And according to new data today from the ABS, building approvals are way down in WA and South Australia compared with Victoria and New South Wales. As a result, Perth and Adelaide have also seen big increases in rents for units and apartments, up 12.4% and 9% in the past 12 months. Even in Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane, rents are still rising a lot faster than inflation and incomes, 6 to 7%. The share market was up a bit today with gains by banks and retailers, falls by mining companies. The oil price fell sharply while other commodities fell less. The US market went up 1% on Friday, but Chinese stocks fell today and the Aussie dollar stayed under 68 US cents. And that's finance.
Australia has had its most successful day at the Paralympics in Paris with a haul of 10 medals. Nikki Ayres and Jed Altschwager led the charge when they combined for Australia's first ever gold in rowing.
Australia has the lead.
In the 16 years since rowing was introduced to the Paralympics, Australia had never won a gold. But in the new discipline of PR3 mixed double sculls, Nikki Ayres and Jed Altschwager made history.
But this dynamic duo, they've been all before them, and today they've conquered the greatest challenge of them all.
In Narooma on the New South Wales south coast, friends and family of Ayres revelled in the triumph.
Super emotional. I've cried probably 4 separate times by now.
It's a privilege and honour just to even be able to wear the green and gold, but to be out here on the Paralympic stage in front of our families, friends in Australia back home and bringing home the gold is just a life-changing moment we'll never forget.
The open C1 to C5.
In the velodrome, Corey Boddington added a bronze medal to his gold as he anchored the 750-metre team sprints. With Alistair Donohoe and Gordon Allen, the trio had just 3 training sessions to prepare as a team.
We had no idea what we were going to do, but that was special.
Oh, there's a shock here.
Ahmed Kelly was incorrectly disqualified after his heat for performing the wrong stroke. The swimmer known as Liquid Nails protested and was reinstated in the 150-metre SM3 individual medley final, where he finished with a silver medal ahead of teammate Grant Scooter Patterson.
It's hard to believe what's happened over the last few hours, but we're here tonight and we can now celebrate a bit. So
While Australian athletes celebrated their results around Paris, the Australian wheelchair rugby team, the Steelers, literally threw away an opportunity to play in the gold medal match.
Oh, it's been picked off.
As Australia had an agonising 52-51 loss to Japan in extra time. The Steelers will meet Great Britain in the bronze medal game.
Lauren Parker v. Kendall Gretsch.
And after a delay in the triathlon, Australia made up for lost time, starting day 5 in sparkling style, with Lauren Parker clinching gold in the PTWC event.
Beaten by a second in Tokyo, demolishes the field in Paris.
A dream come true today. I've been through a lot in the last 3 years.
David Mark, ABC News, Paris.
Alexei Popyrin's career best run in a Grand Slam is over after his fourth-round defeat at the US Open. The Aussie went down in 4 sets to local favourite Frances Tiafoe.
He took down Novak Djokovic, but Alexei Popyrin now faced a battle with the New York crowd ready to ride home a favourite son in the so-called city that never sleeps. His hot hand was on early. That's a good shot. But a Tiafoe break had Flushing Meadows on its feet. That went up a level as the American claimed the first set 6-4.
Barely has put a foot wrong.
The energy carried Tiafoe into the second, but Popyrin's power still proved a crowd silencer. You got to give it up to Popyrin. The Aussie's serve is his biggest weapon, though, and it faltered in the second set tiebreak. The Sydney sider had achieved too much in the last month to simply lie down. The third set was all his, 6-2, and back in business.
Game and third set, Popyrin.
As the pressure told on the local hope, a manic New York crowd helped dig him out of it. With Hollywood royalty watching on, Popyrin would defend 2 match points and then have a chance to break back. When that was spurned, his spirit was broken. Tiafoe through to take on Grigor Dimitrov in the quarters. Australia's US Open hopes now resting with one of Alex de Minaur or Jordan Thompson, who face each other tomorrow. Daniel Garb, ABC News.
Let's take a look at the weather now. And Tom, another day of wild winds for the state.
Lydia, gale force winds lashed our southeast districts as a vigorous cold front swept east. Now, some of the highest measured gusts included 117 kilometres per hour at Thredbo and 106 at Bombala and also Mossvale. The blustery change hit Sydney around midday. It remained sunny, but with westerly winds peaking from 70 to 90 kilometres per hour in most suburbs. Strong enough for an unusually choppy Sydney harbour. After a very mild low of 17, the city reached 25 late this morning. That was 5 above average before the front arrived and brought colder temperatures this afternoon. The top of the mountains reached 13, however, with a wind chill barely above 0. Now, today capped off an extended spell of remarkable warmth for Sydney. 13 consecutive days with a maximum at least 5 above the average. The result is, after a near normal start to last month, August finished as the warmest on record for Sydney, with both minimums and maximums 3 above the long-term average. And the Bureau has now confirmed New South Wales as a whole also observed its warmest August on record. Minimums overnight were as much as 11 above the average in the east, Merimbula 18, that was a September record. The maximums today were variable to the extreme. Preceding the front on the north coast, Yamba 33 had their warmest September day in 21 years, while in the south, Thredbo's high was, well, actually -4. That 0 was recorded before 9 a.m, so it doesn't count. Now, on the satellite, this speckled cloud indicates very cold polar air, and up to 10 centimetres of snow has fallen today across the Alps. On the chart, the cold front is now heading offshore, allowing winds to ease, and a high will move in tomorrow and bring a much calmer day. Around the country, Melbourne was even windier than Sydney today. Port Phillip saw gusts up to 140 kilometres per hour. That's equivalent to a Category 2 tropical cyclone. For tomorrow, back to settled weather for our southeast capitals, while the cooler air will push north. Brisbane, after hitting 34 today, will drop to 25. Now, for the northeast, cooler southerly winds, even frost patches returning to the ranges. Mostly sunny day with tops falling to around the 20-degree mark. For the southeast, still a warning for damaging gusts, but it will be cancelled overnight. Frost patches on the ranges, then a mostly sunny and cool afternoon. To the west, a chilly night, then a sunny day. Light winds for most areas. Highs from 16 in the south to 22 in the north. On the waters, strong winds are slowly easing and the seas will still average around 3 metres. Now for Sydney, sunny with southerly winds to 30 kilometres per hour. The coolest day in 2 weeks, 10 to 19 in the city and Parramatta, 7 to 20 in Penrith. Sun will rise at 6:10 and ahead a cold start Wednesday, then mostly sunny, 22 to 25. Warm northwesterly winds will return for Thursday and Friday, back up to 29 to 30. That's ahead of a weak cool change with the odd shower possible this weekend, Lydia.
Thanks, Tom. Here's Sarah Ferguson now with 7:30.